It started as a simple plan. I just needed some peace and quiet to get a work project done. That was all. My apartment in the city had become too noisy. Neighbors arguing through the walls, traffic outside every window, sirens at night. I couldn't focus on anything anymore. My deadline was close, and I was starting to panic. I looked online for somewhere quiet, cheap, and away from people. After a bit of searching, I found a small cabin listed by a private owner. It was up north in the forest, 2 hours from the nearest town.
No Wi-Fi, no distractions.
Just me and my work. That's what I thought I needed. The listing said the cabin had power, water, and a small gas heater. The pictures showed a basic wooden cabin with a metal roof, a small porch, and thick woods all around. It looked old but clean. The owner sent me directions and told me where to find the key. It all seemed easy. I packed enough food for 10 days, filled up my car, and made the drive up. The road to the cabin was rough. After the highway, I had to take a dirt road for about 45 minutes, and then a narrower trail that looked barely used. My tires kicked up gravel and mud. Branches scratched the side of my car. I started to lose cell service about halfway there. By the time I reached the place, my signal was completely gone. But the cabin was exactly like the photos. Plain wood walls, small windows, a single front door. A short metal chimney stuck out the top. There was a shed nearby and a fire pit out front.
No neighbors.
Just woods. The air smelled clean and earthy. It was quiet. So quiet I could hear my own breathing. I felt a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. I brought my bags inside and looked around. The main room had a table, a chair, a cot with a foam mattress, and a small kitchen area with a gas stove and sink. There was a bathroom with a compost toilet and a small water tank outside that fed the sink and shower. There was a tiny attic space I couldn't access. Just a square wooden panel in the ceiling above the table, but it looked sealed shut. The first 2 days were normal. I worked during the day and slept early. The quiet helped. I made simple meals and kept things tidy. I brought a solar-powered battery pack and used it to charge my laptop and a lantern. I didn't bring any music or movies. I wanted zero distractions. But by the third day, I started to notice small things that felt off. It began with a sound. Late that night, just as I was falling asleep, I heard a soft scraping sound. It came from the side of the cabin, maybe near the back wall. I froze in bed and listened. At first, I thought it might be an animal. There were plenty of raccoons, deer, even bears up there. I figured it was nothing serious. But the scraping was slow and steady, almost like someone dragging their nails along the wall. After a minute, it stopped. I got up and looked through the back window. Nothing, just dark trees. I tried to sleep again, but I kept thinking about it. The next morning, I checked the outside wall where I thought the sound came from. I didn't see anything at first, but then I spotted a mark, a faint vertical line on the wood, like something had scratched it lightly. It was about 2 feet long and low to the ground. I bent down to look closer. It didn't look like claw marks from an animal. It looked more like something scraped it slowly with a stick or maybe a dull knife. I tried not to overthink it. I told myself it could have been anything, maybe an old mark I hadn't noticed before. But it got worse that night. I was working at the table around 10 p.m. when I heard what sounded like footsteps outside. Not heavy, but clear, crunching leaves. They stopped just outside the front wall. I sat perfectly still, my hands frozen above my keyboard. I didn't move for almost a full minute. Then I slowly reached over and turned off the lantern. The cabin went dark. I didn't have any weapons, just a small pocket knife. I picked it up and held it tight. I waited in the dark, listening. The footsteps didn't come any closer, but they didn't leave either. Whoever or whatever it was just stood there. After maybe 5 minutes, the steps moved again, this time toward the back of the cabin. I quietly stood up and stepped to the window, just barely peeking through the side of the curtain. I couldn't see anything. No light, no shapes, just trees and shadows. But I felt something, a tight feeling in my chest, like I was being watched. The footsteps circled the cabin once, slowly, and then faded into the trees. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I went outside with my knife in hand. I didn't see any footprints, It had rained lightly the night before, so the ground was wet and soft, but there were no clear marks. I walked in circles around the cabin, looking. I went as far as the tree line, maybe 20 feet out. I didn't see anything, but I started to feel something strange in those woods, a kind of pressure, like the air was thicker. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks. I hadn't slept, I was stressed, I was alone. It made sense that I might be on edge. But that afternoon, I noticed something that changed everything. I went to the shed to grab some wood. The shed was locked with a latch, but the woodpile was next to it. As I picked up a few logs, I saw a small patch of ground that had been cleared, just a few feet wide. The leaves and pine needles had been brushed aside. In the middle of that patch, someone had placed a dead squirrel. It had been cut open. The insides were missing. The cut was clean and straight, not something an animal would do. I dropped the logs and backed away. My stomach turned. That wasn't a natural death. That was placed there, left for someone to find. I don't know how I hadn't seen it earlier. It hadn't been there the day before. I went back inside, locked the door, and pushed the table in front of it. I stayed inside the rest of the day, barely able to eat. I tried to work, but I kept looking out the windows. I thought about leaving, but my car was nearly out of gas. I had only planned for short drives to town once or twice, but I hadn't gone anywhere since arriving. The closest gas station was over 2 hours away. I figured I'd leave in the morning and just risk it. That night, I turned off all the lights early. I sat in bed with my pocket knife, my eyes on the front window. Around midnight, I heard something new. A sharp knock, just one, on the back wall. I held my breath. Then, 10 seconds later, another knock. This one on the left side of the cabin. Then another, on the far wall. Whoever was out there was walking around the cabin, knocking once on each wall. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. It went on for nearly 15 minutes. Knock, pause, knock, pause, then nothing. I stayed up till dawn, staring at the door. As soon as the sun rose, I grabbed my keys, my bag, and ran to the car. I didn't care about anything else. I threw everything in the back seat, started the engine, and prayed it would make it. But as I turned the car around, I noticed something in the trees. Someone was standing there, not close, maybe 100 feet away, just past the tree line. I couldn't see their face. They were wearing dark clothes or maybe just covered in dirt. Their arms hung low, and they didn't move. They just stood there. I didn't stop. I hit the gas and drove fast, tearing down the narrow trail. Branches hit the car, rocks bounced under the tires. I didn't care. I kept checking the rearview mirror, but I didn't see anything chasing me. I made it to the dirt road, then the highway. The gas light came on, but I kept going until I reached a gas station. I didn't stop until I was miles away from those woods. I didn't tell anyone right away. I was embarrassed. It felt crazy to say I was scared out of a cabin by footsteps and scratches and dead animals. But it wasn't just fear. It was the way it all felt planned. Like someone had been watching me since I got there. Like they knew I was alone. Weeks passed. I tried to forget about it. I went back to my apartment. I finished my project. Life moved on. But a month later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in shaky letters. Inside was a single photo. It was a picture of the cabin, taken from the woods. At night, in the window, I could see myself, sitting at the table, working. I never went back to the cabin, and I never found out who took that photo. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up thinking I hear a knock on the wall. Just one. Always just one. And then silence. I took a trip to northern Idaho in late October of 2021. I had been stressed for months from work, burned out, and restless. I was working from home since the pandemic started, and I barely left my apartment in Seattle. I used to enjoy hiking and being outdoors, but the city drained that out of me. I had some vacation days left that I never used, and my manager encouraged me to take a break, so I finally booked a cabin I found through a listing site. It was cheap, available, and looked rustic enough to feel like a real escape. The place was deep in the woods, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town and completely off the main road. There were a few other rental cabins nearby, but most of them looked closed for the season. Mine was advertised as secluded and peaceful, perfect for solo travelers. I didn't think much of it at the time. That was exactly what I wanted. I packed light, some clothes, food, a few books, and my laptop just in case I wanted to write. I brought a small hatchet, a folding knife, a flashlight, a sleeping bag even though the cabin had a bed, and a power bank for backup. I also printed out the directions because I knew cell service would be unreliable out there. The drive was quiet. Trees lined both sides of the road, and I barely saw another car for miles. The last stretch was a dirt road, full of potholes and lined with tall pines and birches that swayed with the wind. The leaves had mostly fallen by then, leaving the trees thin and bare. I reached the cabin a little before sunset. It looked even more isolated in person than it did in the photos. The place was small, just one room with a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, a twin bed, and a wood stove. There was a bathroom attached with a compost toilet and a gravity-fed sink. No running water, no Wi-Fi, and no electricity except for a couple of solar-powered lights. The air smelled like dry leaves and pine, and the wind made a low whooshing sound through the trees. I unpacked, lit a couple of candles from the emergency kit, and made a sandwich for dinner. That night was cold. I used extra blankets and still had to keep my hoodie on while I slept. The first day passed uneventfully. I hiked around the nearby trails, took some photos, and sat on the little porch reading a book. I didn't see another person all day. The silence out there was unlike anything I was used to. No sirens, no cars, no voices. Just the wind, the creaking trees, and the occasional snap of a branch. It was around the 3rd night when I started to feel something was off. I had gone to bed early because it got dark fast in those woods. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to a thump outside. Not a loud crash, more like a solid step, like something heavy shifting its weight on the porch. My first thought was a bear, but I had locked all the food up in the bear box outside. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the window. I didn't see anything. I waited a minute, listening, heart thumping in my chest. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just a branch or the wind slamming something loose. I went back to bed. The next morning, I stepped outside and looked around. Nothing was knocked over. No tracks, though the ground was hard and dry. Still, something didn't sit right. I brushed it off and made breakfast. I tried to focus on writing a little, but I couldn't keep my thoughts together. I ended up just wandering through the trees for hours, keeping within sight of the trail markers. That night, I double-checked the lock on the door. I kept the hatchet near the bed. I didn't fall asleep easily. Around 3 a.m., I woke up again. This time, I was sure I heard movement. Slow, crunching steps in the leaves. Not fast, not panicked, just a few steps, then nothing. I waited, lying still, barely breathing. I clicked on my flashlight but didn't point it at the window. I didn't want to give away that I was awake. I sat like that for an hour, just listening. Then it stopped. Whatever it was, it had moved on. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the cabin. This time I noticed something. Near the edge of the trees, about 20 feet from the cabin, was a small pile of rocks. I hadn't seen it before. It wasn't a natural pile. It looked deliberate, flat stones stacked in a cone shape. I didn't touch it. Maybe some hiker left it, but it didn't make sense. The nearest marked trail was half a mile away. Creeped me out. I went back inside, packed a small bag, and decided to drive into town for the day. In town, I bought more bottled water, some snacks, and a few fire starters. I thought about asking the general store clerk if anything strange ever happened out there, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to sound like a paranoid city guy. I spent some time at a diner, used the Wi-Fi to check messages, then drove back just before sunset. As I pulled up, I noticed something that chilled me. One of the chairs on the porch was moved. Not a lot, just a couple feet to the left. I always pushed them under the table when I was done sitting. I knew I had. I walked slowly toward it, heart pounding again. I checked the lock on the door. still locked. I opened it and looked around. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place. But the air felt wrong, like the cabin had been disturbed. That night, I barely slept. I kept the flashlight in my hand. I didn't hear anything outside, but I felt watched, like there were eyes in the forest. I kept staring at the windows, waiting to see movement, but nothing happened. The next morning, I packed everything. I had booked 4 nights, but I was leaving a day early. I didn't care. Something was out there, and I didn't want to find out what. As I loaded the car, I checked the tree line again. The rock pile was gone. That drive out was the longest 30 minutes of my life. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting someone, or something, to be following me down that road. Back in Seattle, I told myself I had overreacted. Maybe I was just too used to the noise of the city. Maybe the chair had been knocked by wind. Maybe the rocks were nothing. But even weeks later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. 3 months passed. I was scrolling through news articles when I saw a headline that stopped me cold. Human remains found near popular cabin rentals in northern Idaho. I clicked the link. The article said that a hiker had gone missing in November and that a group of hunters found remains about a quarter-mile off a dirt road near an old cabin. I looked up the location. It was the same area where I stayed. The article didn't say how the person died. It didn't even give a name, just that they were believed to have been dead for weeks before being discovered. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands were cold. That night, when I heard something outside, when I saw the moved chair, when I found the rocks, someone could have been out there, watching me, stalking that area, hiding in the woods, maybe even using the cabins for shelter when they were empty. The idea that I might have just narrowly missed something worse than fear haunted me for months. I deleted the rental listing from my saved places. I never went back, and I never will. I drove nearly 8 hours to reach that cabin. I didn't tell many people where I was going. I just needed space. I needed quiet, no phone, no people, no stress. The job had been eating me alive. Life in the city felt like a box slowly closing in. Every week, traffic, sirens, meetings, bills, noise. It just never ended. I felt like I couldn't breathe. So when I found the listing online, a small, old log cabin sitting alone near a lake in northern Montana, I booked it. I told myself it would be good to reset. Just me, the woods, and silence. It was mid-October, so the air had that cold, clean feeling. The leaves were golden and orange, some still hanging on, most scattered across the road. The last town I passed was over an hour behind me, and after that, it was nothing but winding gravel roads through forested hills. I didn't see another car the entire last stretch. That was the point. I didn't want to see anyone. When I pulled up to the cabin, it looked exactly like the pictures, maybe a little older in person. It sat on a small clearing with tall trees all around, a short path leading to the lake a few hundred yards out. There was a porch with a bench and one of those creaky wooden doors with a hook lock and rusty handle. No internet, no TV, and spotty radio reception. Perfect. Inside, it was one room, with stove in the corner, small kitchen area, one bed, a little table, a lantern, no central heating, but there were piles of chopped wood stacked outside and inside. The place had a smell, kind of like pine mixed with something older. Not bad, just old. The first day was easy. I settled in, made some soup on the little propane stove, chopped more firewood just to keep warm, and read an old paperback I brought with me. I stayed up a little late writing in my notebook, trying to clear my head of all the garbage that had been building up. I felt calm for the first time in a long while, but the second day was different. Not scary at first, just strange. I woke up early and went to the lake. The water was still and cold, like glass. I sat out there on a big flat rock, drank coffee from my thermos, and thought about how peaceful it all felt. On the way back, I saw tracks in the dirt near the trees, kind of near where my car was parked. At first, I thought it was a deer, but the shape was all wrong. It looked almost like a boot print, but wide. The sole didn't match mine, and I hadn't seen anyone else since I got there. I told myself it could have been from before. Maybe someone came last week, and the prints hadn't washed away. Still, they were fresh, not dry and not old. Later that day, I walked about a mile down one of the trails near the cabin. It looped around and followed the edge of a ridge before dropping into a gully and curving back. About halfway through, I found what looked like a hunting blind up in a tree. It was old, weathered, and partly broken. But underneath it, on the forest floor, I saw an empty can of food and a torn piece of tarp. And next to the tree, a pile of cigarette butts. Some of them looked fresh. That's when the unease started creeping in. I didn't hear anything out there.
No dista engines, no voices, no barges.
I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I know how that sounds, but it was the way the quiet pressed in on me that did it. I started walking faster and didn't stop until I got back to the cabin. That night, I locked the door from the inside. I even moved the little bench in front of it just to feel better. It wasn't fear yet, not fully, just this creeping feeling in my stomach that something wasn't right. I stayed up by the fire until almost 2 a.m. I thought I heard something outside once, but when I opened the door and looked out with the flashlight, there was nothing there. On the third day, the mood changed. I went to get firewood early in the morning, and one of the wood stacks near the back of the cabin had fallen over. At first, I thought an animal knocked it down, but the pieces looked moved, like someone had dug through it. A few were even laid out on the ground in a straight line, like they were picked up and dropped. It didn't make sense. I went around the cabin and checked everything. The windows were still shut. The car was untouched, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being messed with. I even walked back out to where I saw the tracks near the car. New ones, fresh, the same wide boot shape. Only now, they led from the trees toward the back of the cabin, then disappeared into the brush. I told myself it was probably a hunter or someone passing through, but it made no sense. Why sneak up to a cabin in the middle of nowhere, look around, and not say anything? I decided to hike out to higher ground. I remembered seeing a slope not far from the ridge trail. I figured maybe I could get a signal and check my phone. I hadn't used it since I got here. The battery was still half full. I climbed up a steep patch of rocks until I reached a small clearing. I held my phone up and got 1 bar. No data, but I sent one text to my brother. All good. Off-grid. Be back Monday. I stared at the screen for a long time, hoping it would send. Eventually, it said, sent. That was enough. I felt better. But going back down, I spotted something that froze me in place. It was a trail of prints. Same boot shape, same size. They weren't mine. They followed the side of the hill just below where I was. They weren't going anywhere in particular, just pacing like someone had stood down there watching. That night was the worst. I didn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard movement outside. Not just wind, not branches, footsteps, slow and heavy. They crunched over the leaves, paused, then continued. I didn't have a gun, just a hatchet and a big kitchen knife. I sat in the dark, holding both, barely breathing. I wanted to turn the lantern on, but I didn't. I didn't want whoever was out there to see me. After what felt like hours, the noise stopped. I waited until morning before stepping outside. I barely slept. When I finally opened the door, I saw something on the porch that made my stomach flip. A dead rabbit. Clean. No blood, no bite marks. Just dead. Laid out right on the bench. Like a message. I stood there staring at it for a long time. Then I took it deep into the woods and tossed it far from the trail. I walked back to the cabin fast. My whole body felt tense. I packed my things. I was going to leave, but when I went to start the car, the battery was dead. I opened the hood. Nothing looked wrong. No chewed wires, no loose cables. The car had been fine 3 days straight. It was an old truck, but reliable. Now it made no sound, not even a click. That's when it really hit me. Someone had been near my car. They knew I was alone. They were watching. I sat in the cabin the rest of that day. I didn't go out again. I barely ate. I sat near the door with the hatchet in my lap and waited for dark. That night, they came back. I heard the first noise around 11 p.m. footsteps again. Then something brushed the side of the cabin. Light, like fingers on wood. I killed the fire. Sat in the cold, watching the door. I didn't move. Then came the sound I won't ever forget. Breathing. Close. Not mine. It was outside the window, low to the ground, like someone crouched there. I could feel the breath through the thin wall. Long, steady, deliberate. Then, finally, slow footsteps walking away into the trees. I sat there until sunrise. The next day, I didn't think. I just packed what I could carry and started walking. I left the rest behind. I didn't even care about the car. I followed the road back the way I came. Took hours. I kept looking over my shoulder every few minutes, thinking I'd see someone stepping out of the trees. I didn't stop walking. My feet hurt. My throat was dry. I passed through 2 empty intersections before finally seeing a truck coming from the opposite direction. The guy stopped when I waved. He looked at me like I was insane. I probably did look crazy. Mud on my face. No sleep. Holding a hatchet like it was glued to my hand. I asked for a ride to town. He didn't ask many questions. I didn't tell him much. I just said my car broke down and I'd been walking. I made it back home that night. Called my brother. Told him I was cutting my trip short. That was 2 years ago. The police went out to the cabin after I filed a report. They didn't find anything. No signs of forced entry. No prints. No people. My car was still there. Battery had been yanked out completely. The wires were hidden in the woods. Someone had taken their time. They ruled it suspicious activity. That was it. No answers. I don't go camping anymore. I don't go out into the woods alone. I even moved to a different place, somewhere with neighbors close enough to see my windows. To this day, I don't know what that person wanted. They never spoke. They never showed their face. But they knew I was there. They studied me. They moved things just enough to make me feel scared. And it worked. I think the scariest part is not knowing if they were just watching, or if they were waiting for the right moment to do something worse. And if my car had started, if I had stayed one more night, maybe I wouldn't be here to write this. It was early September when I decided to head out to a small cabin I had found online. It was tucked deep into the northern part of the state, surrounded by thick pine forests, about 4 miles off the main road, accessible only by a long dirt trail. I rented it for 10 days. I wanted peace. No cell reception, no internet, no neighbors. I had been feeling burned out from work and needed to reset. The idea of being completely alone sounded perfect at the time. The cabin was small, maybe 400 square feet. It had 1 room, a tiny bathroom, and a front porch that overlooked a small, grassy clearing. Beyond the clearing, the woods grew dense and dark. Inside, the cabin had a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a wood-burning stove, and a shelf with a few tools and basic cooking gear. The walls were made of old timber, and the place had a faint smell of pine, smoke, and earth. The first 2 days were quiet. I spent my time chopping wood, cooking simple meals, and reading. I walked the woods during the day, not too far, just around the cabin's area, making sure I stayed on the path I marked with strips of orange tape. The quiet was deep out there, almost too deep. Even the birds were rare. The only sounds came from the wind moving through the trees, the crunch of needles under my boots, and the creaks of the old cabin. By the 3rd night, I started to notice small things that felt off. I had a habit of setting everything in a particular order. I'd place my lighter, pocket knife, and flashlight on the table before bed. That night, when I woke up to use the bathroom around 3 a.m., the lighter was gone. I found it under the table. I told myself I must have knocked it off by accident. The next day, I went out to check the perimeter of the cabin. I saw something strange near the edge of the woods, close to where the trees began. There was a dead rabbit lying on its side. Its neck looked broken, and it had no visible injuries. No blood, no bite marks, nothing. Just lying there, stiff and cold. I didn't touch it. I backed away slowly and kept an eye on the tree line as I returned to the cabin. That night, the wind picked up. The trees creaked and groaned like they were warning me of something. I kept the fire going strong in the stove and tried to read, but I couldn't focus. Every small sound outside made me look up. I finally fell asleep close to midnight. I woke up suddenly. I didn't know what time it was. It was still dark. The fire had gone out. I felt cold. I sat up in bed and listened. There was nothing at first. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Not an animal. Too heavy. The footsteps moved across the porch. The old wood creaked with each step. Then silence. I stayed frozen in bed. I didn't move. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. I finally worked up the courage to grab my flashlight. I clicked it on and pointed it toward the door. The lock was still in place. I got up slowly, walked to the door, and opened it just a crack. No one was there. The porch was empty. I stepped outside and swept the beam of my flashlight across the clearing. Caught nothing but grass and darkness. Then I pointed it down to the porch floor. Footprints. There were 2 muddy boot prints right in front of the door. Big ones. Definitely not mine. I wear size 10. These were bigger and wider. I went back inside, locked the door, and stayed up the rest of the night with the flashlight on and my knife in my hand. My heart didn't stop racing for hours. When the sun came up, I walked out to check the ground again. The prints were still there. They came from the tree line, crossed the clearing, stopped at the porch, and went back into the woods. The path they took in the grass was clear. That morning, I thought about leaving. I really did. But I told myself maybe it was a hunter, maybe someone got lost. I didn't like the idea of someone walking up to the cabin in the middle of the night, but I figured it might have been a one-time thing. I stayed. That was my mistake. The next night was even worse. Around the same time, 3 a.m., I heard the footsteps again, but this time they circled the cabin. Slow steps, deliberate, moving around the building. I sat in bed, not moving, listening. At one point, I heard the sound of fingers brushing against the wall outside, like someone dragging their hand along the wood. It stopped near the back of the cabin. Then I heard tapping on the bathroom window. I didn't move. The tapping came again, 3 times, then nothing. In the morning, I checked the window. There was a smudge on the glass, a handprint, large, too large to be mine. I walked the entire perimeter of the cabin that day, looking for anything else. I found more boot prints. They were scattered around, mostly near the windows. There was also a mark on one of the trees, 3 vertical cuts in the bark about 6 feet off the ground. Deep ones, like someone had used a big hunting knife. On the 6th day, I went farther into the woods to find a spot with reception. It took me over an hour, but I found a small ridge where my phone caught a weak signal. I sent a message to a friend, gave them the location, and said if they didn't hear from me in 2 days, to call the cops. That night, the cabin got worse. I didn't even try to sleep. I stayed up with the flashlight, the stove burning, knife ready. Around 2:45 a.m., the noises started. This time it was knocking, not on the front door, on the back wall, slow and steady. Then it stopped. Then came scratching, long, slow scratches along the back wall. I sat in the middle of the room, shaking. Then silence again. I stayed frozen for at least an hour. Then the front door creaked, just a little. I stared at it. I had locked it. I got up slowly and walked toward it. The lock was still in place, but the door had moved, like someone pushed it gently from the outside. I checked the porch with my light. The prints were back. More of them this time, multiple sets. I realized then it wasn't just one person. I barely slept the rest of that night. As soon as daylight came, I packed my gear. I shoved everything into my bag, grabbed the axe from outside, and started walking. I didn't even wait for my ride back to the main road. I walked the 4 miles out, checking behind me every few minutes. I thought I saw movement in the trees more than once. I never stopped to check. When I made it back to my car at the edge of the dirt road, I found something that made my blood run cold. Someone had gone through my car. The doors were unlocked. Everything inside had been rummaged through. My maps were missing. My emergency phone was gone. And on the driver's seat was a small carving knife. Not mine. I drove straight to the nearest police station, 20 miles out. I told them everything. They wrote it all down. An officer drove back with me to check the cabin. The footprints were gone. The smudges were gone. The rabbit was gone. Even the handprint on the bathroom window was wiped clean. But one thing hadn't changed. The 3 claw marks in the tree bark. Still there. The police told me they'd file a report. They said maybe it was squatters, maybe local kids messing around. I could tell they didn't really believe me. I didn't care. I left that cabin and never looked back. I canceled the rest of the rental and stayed in a motel until my vacation was over. I didn't sleep right for weeks. Even now, months later, I still think about it. I don't go hiking alone anymore. I don't camp far from towns. And I sure as hell never go anywhere without cell reception. Because someone, or maybe more than one person, was watching me out there. And I don't think it was the first time they'd done it. It was late October when I decided to take a break from my job and get away for a bit. I had been working nonstop for months, and I needed some quiet. I didn't want a beach or a hotel or anything like that. I wanted a place away from people, somewhere in the woods where I could just sit and breathe. I ended up finding this small cabin up north, deep in the forest, through a private rental site. The pictures showed a simple wooden structure, surrounded by thick trees, with a narrow dirt road leading to it. No neighbors, no town nearby, just a cabin, a stream running not far from it, and woods that went on for miles. I packed up my SUV with the basics: canned food, water, clothes, a couple flashlights, batteries, and a camping stove just in case. I even brought some firewood since the listing mentioned there was a fireplace inside the cabin. The drive took about 8 hours, and by the time I reached the area, the sun was already low. The last stretch of the road was rough and barely drivable. It was more of a trail than a road, lined with trees and full of rocks and fallen branches. My tires slipped a bit on the dirt, but eventually I made it. The cabin looked just like the pictures, small, square, and worn down from time. It had a slanted roof, a tiny porch with a single broken chair, and an old window with a dusty curtain pulled halfway shut. I could hear the sound of running water nearby. I assumed it was the stream. The air was cold and still, the kind of cold that didn't just touch your skin but slid into your bones. I parked close to the steps and took everything inside. The place smelled like old wood and dust, but it was clean enough. There was a small bed against the wall, a kitchen area with a rusty sink, and a wooden table with 2 mismatched chairs. No electricity, just a lantern hanging near the door and a few candles on the windowsill. After unpacking and lighting a few candles, I made a small fire in the fireplace using some of the wood I brought. The heat took a while to spread, but it felt good once it did. I opened a can of beans and heated them up over the fire, eating straight from the can. I wasn't expecting luxury. I just wanted quiet. I got into bed early that night, listening to the wind moving through the trees outside. It was the kind of silence that made every little sound stand out. A branch snapping, leaves crunching, the faint splash of water from the stream. But I didn't feel uneasy. Not then. I was tired, and the fire had died down to glowing embers. The first night passed without anything strange. But the next morning, I woke up early and decided to explore a bit. I followed the stream for a while, walking through the trees, trying to clear my head. The forest was thick, the kind of place where it was easy to lose direction if you weren't paying attention. I kept the stream in sight so I wouldn't wander too far. I didn't see any animals, just some old footprints near the water. They looked like boot prints, but they were spaced far apart like whoever made them had a wide stride. I didn't think much of it. Maybe a hunter or someone who had rented the cabin before me. That evening, I went out to chop some more firewood. I found a small stack under a tarp behind the cabin, next to an old metal shed. The door to the shed was chained shut, and the lock was rusted. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The tarp covering the firewood had some holes in it, and the logs underneath were damp. I picked the driest ones and brought them inside. As the fire got going again, I sat near it, drinking coffee from a metal mug. I tried to read a bit, but the light wasn't great, and my eyes kept drifting back to the window. I thought I saw movement out there once, like something shifting between the trees, but when I looked harder, it was just still darkness, probably just the wind. That night, I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't loud, just something subtle, like a faint creaking noise. At first, I thought it was the cabin settling. Old buildings make noises, but it kept happening, soft and steady. I sat up and listened. It seemed to be coming from outside. I got up, wrapped a blanket around myself, and went to the window. I couldn't see much, but I noticed something strange. The door to the shed, the one that had been chained and locked. It was now open just a crack. The chain was dangling, and the padlock was on the ground. That stopped me cold. I didn't go out. I didn't want to. I just stood there staring at it for a long time. The fire was dying behind me, and the cabin felt colder. Eventually, I moved away from the window and stoked the fire again. I stayed up most of the night, half dozing in the chair, but I didn't hear anything else. The next morning, I went outside with a flashlight even though it was already light. The door to the shed was open wider now. I walked up to it slowly. The inside was filled with junk. Old tools, rusted cans, some broken furniture, and what looked like the remains of old animal traps. Nothing that explained why the door had opened on its own. There were no fresh footprints, no sign of animals. I closed the shed again and pushed the chain through the handles, but the lock wouldn't latch anymore. It was bent and useless. I didn't like the feeling I had. It was like something was off, something just outside what I could see or hear, but still there. I kept going about my day though. I cooked. I walked along the stream again. I tried to read. But the whole time, I felt like I was being watched. Not constantly, just in flashes. Like when you turn around because you feel something behind you, but there's nothing there. I kept checking the trees. I thought maybe it was an animal, maybe a bear, but there were no sounds of big animals, no tracks, no broken branches. The next night was the worst. I had gone to bed with the fire burning strong, trying to make the cabin as warm as possible. Around midnight, I woke up sweating, even though it wasn't that hot. The fire was almost out, and the air felt thick, heavy. Then I heard it again, the creaking. Only this time it was closer, inside. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. I couldn't see much in the dark, but I didn't move. I just listened. There was nothing for a long moment. Then, very faintly, I heard the softest thud, like a step. My body locked up. I didn't know if it was real or if I was imagining it. I reached slowly for the flashlight I had left next to the bed and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, but nothing was there. I got up and looked around. Nothing seemed touched. The door was still bolted. The windows were closed, but that feeling in my gut wouldn't leave. I stayed awake the rest of the night again, sitting in the chair with the flashlight in my lap. Every sound made me jump. When daylight finally came, I packed up. I had booked the cabin for a week, but I had been there for 4 days and that was enough. Couldn't sleep, couldn't relax. Something was wrong with that place and I didn't want to stick around to figure out what. As I was loading the car, I noticed something on the side of the cabin. Scratches on the wood, deep ones like someone had dragged something sharp across it. There were more on the back of the cabin too, near the window where I thought I had seen movement earlier. They weren't there when I arrived. That much I knew for sure. I didn't want to think about what could have made them. I just got in the car and drove. I didn't stop until I hit a main road with other cars and gas stations and signs of life. I never went back. I never even left a review. I don't know if someone was out there messing with me or if it was something else. Some person living in those woods, watching. Maybe someone who didn't like people near their land. All I know is that cabin was not safe. And the worst part is no one else will ever know because nothing happened that you could prove. No crime, no damage, no missing person. Just a door that opened, a lock that broke, footsteps that might have been real, and a feeling that something was wrong. But I trust that feeling now. I trust it more than anything else. And I'll never go into the woods alone again. It was the middle of September when I decided to spend a week alone in a small cabin deep in the Oregon woods. I found it on a listing site where people rented out off-grid places for those wanting to disconnect for a while. The cabin was old but had good reviews. No power, no internet, no running water, just solar-powered lights, a hand pump well, and a wood stove. I thought it would be a great break from work and the city. I packed my old Subaru with food, bottled water, extra clothes, tools, and a few books. The drive took about 5 hours, most of it through dense forest roads that twisted for miles. I lost signal about halfway there. By the time I reached the dirt road leading to the cabin, the sun was low, filtering through the trees in long golden beams. I stopped to double-check the directions on the printed map I brought. Everything matched. I followed the bumpy trail for another mile or so until I saw the cabin up ahead, tucked into the trees like it had grown there. It was a small one-room structure with a covered porch and a chopped woodpile stacked neatly beside it. The roof looked old but held up well. The walls were dark, stained wood. A rusted metal chimney poked out of the top. I parked, unloaded, and carried everything inside. The inside smelled like dry pine and smoke. It was quiet, too quiet at first, until I started to pick up the smaller forest sounds around me. Birds, a light breeze through trees, the occasional rustle of something small moving in the underbrush. The cabin had a cot in the corner with a mattress that looked clean, a small table with 2 wooden chairs, some shelves holding candles, pots, and pans. There was a propane stove that worked with a match. I lit a few candles and set up my things. I read for a while and fell asleep early that night. The first few days were peaceful. I hiked around the trails near the cabin, gathered fallen branches for the stove, cooked simple meals, and wrote in my journal. I didn't see another soul. No airplanes, no engine noise, no cell reception. It was exactly what I wanted. By the 3rd night, the silence started to feel heavy. I wasn't scared, just overly aware of every sound. That night, I woke up to a soft crunching outside the cabin. It was just past midnight, and the forest was pitch dark. I sat up slowly and listened. The sound came again, light, slow footsteps on dry leaves and twigs. I stayed still. Could have been a deer, maybe a raccoon, but the steps circled the cabin. Not fast, not running, just slow and steady. They stopped near the front porch. I waited, heart pounding, barely breathing. I wanted to tell myself it was an animal, but animals didn't move like that. They didn't walk all the way around a building like they were looking for something. I reached for the small hatchet I had brought and sat in the dark for an hour. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I laid back down but didn't sleep much. In the morning, I stepped outside to check. There were scuff marks in the dirt near the porch. Not clear prints, but something had been there. Maybe boots, maybe shoes. Couldn't be sure. I walked around the cabin and saw the same marks along the side and back. I didn't remember seeing them when I arrived. I didn't know if they were fresh. I tried not to think too hard. That afternoon, I heard something deep in the woods. It sounded like a man calling faintly. No words I could make out, just a sound. Like someone yelling, far off. Came and went. I stood on the porch, listening, trying to decide if I should go see. But the sound never came closer. After a while, it stopped completely. That night, I didn't light any candles. I sat in the dark with the stove warming the room and the hatchet on my lap. Hours passed. Then I heard it again, the steps. Same as before. Starting from the side, crunching leaves, circling slowly. I didn't move. This time, I crouched low and peeked out the small window. The moon gave enough light to make out the trees, but not much else. I saw nothing, but I felt watched, like something was right there but hiding just out of sight. Then came a soft thump, something on the porch. I froze. No knocking, no voice, just the sound of weight shifting on old wood. I held my breath for what felt like forever. Eventually, the sound moved away. The steps circled again and faded into the woods. In the morning, I found a stick propped against the front door. It wasn't there before. It wasn't some random fallen branch. It was leaned carefully like someone had placed it. That was it for me. I packed some of my gear, locked the door, and drove down the road until I got a bar of service. I texted my brother and told him something weird was going on. He said if I wasn't comfortable, I should just leave. But I didn't. I don't know why. I told myself I was overreacting, that I came here to get away and test myself. I was being jumpy. I went back to the cabin. That evening, I chopped more wood to stay busy and tried to stay calm. I left the hatchet by the door and kept a flashlight nearby. That night, it was quiet for hours. Then I heard movement again, but this time it wasn't footsteps. It was something brushing against the wall outside. A dragging sound, slow and steady. I held my breath and turned off the small solar lamp. I waited in the dark. The dragging moved along the wall and stopped near the back corner. I waited. Minutes passed. Then something hit the back wall hard, just once. Not enough to break anything, but enough to shake the shelf above my bed. I sat up, flashlight in hand. Nothing followed. No more noise. I stayed like that until morning. When the sun rose, I walked around the cabin. I found a scrape mark on the wood, like something sharp had been dragged across it. I followed the edge of the trees for a while, looking for tracks. About 50 feet out, I found a rope tied around a tree, just a length of frayed, dirty rope tied in a knot. It didn't look old. It looked like it had been placed recently. I took it down and threw it in the fire pit. That evening, I was jumpy. Every crack or flutter of leaves made me spin around. I didn't eat much. I left the fire burning late, hoping the light would keep whatever it was away. Didn't. I fell asleep from exhaustion around midnight. I woke up to a sound inside the cabin. Not outside, inside. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on fast. There was no one there, but the door was wide open. I know I had locked it. I had even tested the latch twice before lying down. My bag had been moved. Nothing stolen, just moved. The stove was cold. The fire had gone out. I stood there for a long time, breathing hard. Then I slowly shut the door and locked it again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I packed everything. I didn't care if I had 4 days left. I threw my gear in the car and drove back down the trail. At the first spot with a signal, I called the owner. I didn't accuse them of anything. I just said something strange had happened and that I had to leave early. They offered a partial refund, which I accepted. Weeks later, back at home, I kept thinking about the rope, the stick on the door, the footsteps. It wasn't an animal. Someone had been watching the cabin. Maybe more than one person. Maybe someone knew the place was rented often by people alone. Maybe they watched the road. I don't know. I reported it to the local sheriff in that county, just in case. They took a report but said without a license plate or name or solid description, there wasn't much to do. It's been a year since then. I haven't gone back to the woods. I still love being alone in nature, but now I'm more careful. I don't book remote places unless I know someone nearby. I bring more than just a hatchet. I trust my gut, and I never stay somewhere I can't leave fast. I don't know who or what was out there with me, but I know I wasn't alone. I took a week off work because I needed to get away from everything. I'd been dealing with long hours, loud traffic, and constant emails. I wanted silence, isolation, and no schedule. Just me, some nature, and no phone signal. I found a remote cabin listed online. It was small, had no internet or cell service, and it was about 4 hours from my city. The pictures showed a simple wooden structure surrounded by trees, with a small deck out front and a narrow dirt road leading to it. That was all I needed. I packed my things the night before. Clothes, food, bottled water, a flashlight, my old hunting knife, and a thick sleeping bag. I also brought some books and a journal. I left early in the morning. The highway was quiet and the sky was still a bit gray when I started. As I got closer to the mountains, the roads became more narrow and winding. I drove through small towns with gas stations that looked 50 years old. Eventually, I turned onto a gravel road that led deep into the woods. The further I drove, the rougher the road got. Potholes, rocks, and fallen branches made me slow down. My tires crunched over the gravel, and trees closed in on both sides. I passed an old rusted sign that was barely readable. I slowed and checked my directions again. According to the listing, the cabin should be another 10 minutes up that road. When I finally saw it through the trees, it looked just like the pictures. Simple, small, and weathered. The wooden walls were faded and the roof had some moss growing on it. There was a small deck with 2 wooden chairs and a dusty window next to the door. I parked beside it, turned off the car, and stepped out. The air was cool and fresh. I stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet. No cars, no people, just wind in the trees and some distant bird calls. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood and dust. It had a single bed with a thick blanket, a small table, and a wood stove. There was a stack of chopped wood beside it, and some basic cooking supplies on a shelf. No electricity, no running water, but I already knew that. I unpacked my things and set them up neatly. The first day was peaceful. I walked a bit through the trees, found a small stream, and sat there for a while. I read part of a book on the deck in the evening and lit a small fire in the stove as the temperature dropped. I had canned soup for dinner and fell asleep early. The silence was thick, but not in a bad way. It felt clean and far away from the noise I was used to. The second day was the same. I woke up early, wrote in my journal, explored more around the area. I didn't see anyone or anything strange, but I started noticing some small things. When I came back from a walk that afternoon, my backpack, which I had left zipped and sitting on the table, was open. Some of the things inside were moved around. I figured maybe I hadn't zipped it fully, or maybe it just tipped. Still, it felt odd. Nothing was missing though. Later that evening, I was sitting outside when I heard something move in the woods. Not a small animal. It sounded like a footstep on dry leaves. Just one. Then nothing. I stared into the trees, but it was hard to see anything in the dim light. I waited for a while, but I didn't hear it again. I went inside and locked the door, even though I hadn't planned on doing that. That night, I woke up once, just before dawn. I wasn't sure what had woken me, but I felt alert. I stayed still and listened. After a minute, I heard what sounded like a creak outside, like wood bending. Could have been the deck. Or a tree. I didn't know. I lay there for a long time before falling back asleep. The next morning, I found a footprint in the soft dirt near the front steps. A single one. It was deep, so whoever made it was heavy. It was a boot print, definitely not mine. Mine were different. I stared at it for a while, trying to figure out how fresh it was. It looked new. I looked around the cabin, but didn't see any other prints or marks. I checked my car. Everything looked fine, but something felt wrong. That day, I stayed close to the cabin. I didn't go far. I kept checking around, listening more closely. Every little sound stood out. A squirrel in the trees made me jump. I kept the knife on me, just in case. I started to feel watched, even though I couldn't prove it. That night, I pushed a chair under the doorknob. It wouldn't stop anyone serious, but it made me feel better. Around midnight, I woke up again. I heard something on the deck. 2 steps. Slow and heavy, then nothing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe loud. I just stared at the ceiling and listened. A minute passed, then another. Then I heard the wooden chair I had wedged under the doorknob creak softly. Not loud, but enough. I sat up and held my knife. I didn't hear anything else for hours. At first light, I opened the door and looked around. Nothing. The woods were quiet. The air felt still. The footprint from before was gone, probably washed away from the dew. I thought about leaving, but I told myself it could be paranoia. Maybe a hunter had passed by. Maybe I was letting fear take over. That day, I went down to the stream again and tried to relax. I skipped rocks and sat with my feet in the cold water. But I kept looking over my shoulder. I felt watched again. I walked back slowly and stopped often, listening. I never saw anyone. But that feeling wouldn't leave. I slept during the day and stayed up most of the night. I kept a candle burning and sat by the window, watching the woods. Around 3 a.m., I saw movement. Person. At the edge of the trees. Just standing there. Too far to see clearly. They didn't move for almost 10 minutes. Just stood. Then they backed away slowly and vanished into the trees. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By then, I was done. I packed my things at dawn. I threw everything into bags and got into the car. When I turned the key, the engine didn't start. It just clicked. I tried again. Nothing. My battery was dead. I checked under the hood, but I didn't know much about cars. Nothing looked broken. It just wouldn't start. I had no cell signal. The nearest town was hours away on foot. I grabbed my bag, locked the cabin behind me, and started walking. I didn't stop much. I just kept moving, following the dirt road I came in on. I kept looking behind me. I thought I heard footsteps once, but when I stopped, everything went silent. It took almost 6 hours to reach the main road. My legs were shaking by the time I saw a truck coming. I waved like a madman and the driver pulled over. I didn't explain much, just asked for a ride to the nearest town. He dropped me off at a gas station, and I used their phone to call a tow truck. They towed my car back later that day. The guy who looked at it said the battery had been disconnected. Cleanly, like someone had unscrewed it. He thought maybe it was a prank or maybe I had done it and forgot. But I knew I hadn't touched it, and no animal could have done that. I never went back to the cabin. I didn't leave a review. I didn't contact the owner. I just left it all behind. Weeks later, I thought about the man in the woods. I thought about the footsteps, the footprint, the car. Someone had been watching me, waiting. Maybe they wanted to scare me. Maybe they were planning something worse. I don't know, but I'm glad I left when I did. I still go into the woods sometimes, but not alone, and never that far. I always make sure I have signal, a charged phone, and people who know where I am. That cabin felt like a perfect escape, but it almost became something else. Something I don't want to think about too much. What happened out there was real, not a ghost story, just a reminder that sometimes the scariest thing in the woods is another person. It started as a simple idea. I just wanted a break from everything. A weekend away in the woods. No noise, no traffic, no people. I was burnt out from work, tired of city life, and sick of staring at screens all day. I found a listing online for a cabin about 4 hours away from where I lived, deep in the northern hills. It was remote, no neighbors for miles, and that was exactly what I needed. The pictures showed an old wooden cabin with a porch, a small dock by a quiet lake, and dense forest all around it. It looked perfect. I left on a Friday morning. I packed light, some food, clothes, a flashlight, batteries, a camping stove, and a few basic tools just in case. The drive was peaceful. As the hours passed, the buildings grew sparse, and the trees got thicker. I left the main road and followed a narrow dirt path that twisted through the forest. My car kicked up dust as I drove slowly over rocks and roots. After a while, the signal on my phone dropped. I didn't mind. That was part of the plan. When I pulled up to the cabin, I took a few minutes just sitting in the car, staring at it. The roof sagged a little, the wood was faded, and the porch steps looked uneven. Still, it had a charm. I got out, stretched my legs, and started unloading my gear. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. There was no sound except the wind through the trees and the occasional chirp of a bird. Inside, the cabin was simple. One main room with a fireplace, a small table, and a bed. There was a tiny kitchen area with a rusted sink that didn't work, and a bathroom with an outhouse out back. No electricity, no running water, just lanterns and an old hand pump outside for water. The windows were dirty but unbroken, and the door closed tight. Felt safe enough. The first evening went by peacefully. I cooked a can of soup on the stove, sat on the porch, and watched the sun go down behind the trees. The lake reflected the pink sky, and the air turned cool. I slept early, wrapped in my sleeping bag, with the lantern turned low. That night, something woke me up, a sound outside. I sat up in bed, listening. It wasn't loud, just something small, like a stick snapping, maybe an animal. I stayed still for a long time, heart beating a little faster. Then I heard it again, a rustle, maybe 10 or 15 feet from the cabin. I got up slowly and walked to the window. It was too dark to see much, just shadows and black trees. I went back to bed, telling myself it was probably a raccoon or a deer. In the forest, animals move around at night. That made sense. I didn't sleep well after that. The next morning, I walked around the cabin, looking for tracks or anything strange. I found nothing. I pumped some water, washed my face, made a small breakfast, and went down to the lake. I sat there for an hour, throwing small rocks into the water and watching the ripples spread. I felt better in the daylight. I told myself I was just being paranoid. City life made me forget how nature works. I spent the rest of the day exploring the area. There was a narrow path that went into the woods behind the cabin. I followed it for a while, moving slowly, paying attention to the trees and the ground. I didn't go too far. I didn't want to get lost. I marked my trail with sticks and little piles of rocks. After a couple hours, I turned back and returned to the cabin. That night, it happened again. I was in bed, almost asleep, when I heard something outside. Not just one sound this time, more like movement, leaves crunching, not fast but steady, like someone walking slowly through the woods. I froze. It didn't stop. I lay still, staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening. The footsteps circled the cabin, then silence. I waited. I stared into the dark room for what felt like an hour. I didn't dare get up or look out the window. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. In the morning, I checked again. Nothing. No tracks. No signs. Just trees and pine needles. Still, something felt off. I thought about leaving, packing up, and heading back home. But part of me didn't want to be that person. The one who panics over nothing. I told myself again it was just animals. Or maybe the wind. Or maybe I was dreaming. I stayed another day. That afternoon, I found something strange. I was walking behind the cabin near the trail I'd explored when I noticed a tree with bark stripped away. About eye level, long claw-like scratches ran down the trunk. Fresh. The wood underneath was pale and clean, not weathered. I ran my fingers over it. It wasn't a clean cut like from a knife. It was rough, uneven. I didn't know what could have made it. A bear maybe, or something else. I didn't go down that trail again. I kept the hatchet close that night. I also brought the flashlight to bed. I didn't fall asleep easily. I lay there, tense, every muscle tight, listening. The wind blew harder that night. The trees creaked. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again, slower this time, crunching, moving around the back of the cabin. Then something brushed against the wall, a soft scraping sound. I held my breath. I felt my heart beating in my throat. The sound moved toward the window. I stayed absolutely still. I didn't even blink. I didn't look. I didn't want to see anything staring back. It was quiet after that. I didn't move until the sky turned gray with morning. I decided I was done. I packed up everything as quickly as I could. I didn't even eat. I just loaded the car and got ready to leave. But the car wouldn't start. Clicked a few times, then nothing. I checked under the hood. I wasn't an expert, but the battery looked fine. I tried again. Nothing. That's when I noticed something. Scratches on the side of the car. Deep ones. Like whatever marked that tree had also come up close during the night. For long lines running down the driver's side. I backed away. My breathing picked up. I looked around but saw nothing. I grabbed the flashlight and the hatchet and went back inside the cabin. I locked the door, put a chair under the knob, and sat on the floor with my back against the wall. My mind raced. Who was out there? Why were they doing this? Was it some sick game? Hours passed. I didn't leave the cabin. I just sat there listening. I thought about walking out and trying to find a main road, but I didn't know which direction to go. And the idea of being in those woods with someone following me was worse than staying put. That night was the worst. I didn't sleep at all. I kept the flashlight on. I stared at the windows. Around midnight, I heard something at the door. A slow, quiet knock. Not loud, just a tap. Then another. Then silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there. It didn't happen again. Eventually, the light of dawn came through the window. I walked out slowly. The car was untouched since the day before. I opened the hood again, jiggled some wires, and tried the key. This time, it started. I don't know why. Maybe the cold had affected it before. Maybe something else. I didn't wait around to figure it out. I drove out of there as fast as I could without wrecking the car. Every bump and turn on that dirt road felt like it was slowing me down. When I hit the highway, I almost cried. I didn't stop driving until I got home. That was 2 weeks ago. I still haven't told anyone. I didn't file a report. I didn't tell the owner of the cabin. I just went back to work and tried to pretend everything was normal. But every time I close my eyes, I see the woods. I hear the footsteps, and I still don't know what was out there. Person? An animal? I don't know. I just know it was watching me, waiting, I won't ever go back. I thought I wanted quiet. I thought I wanted to get away. But I learned something important in that cabin. When you're truly alone, really isolated, far from help or safety, you stop feeling free. You start feeling hunted. And once you feel that, once you know what it's like to hear someone walking around your cabin in the middle of the night with no good reason to be there, it stays with you, changes you. I still dream about the sound of that knock. It was early November when I decided to take some time off work and head out to a cabin I had rented in northern Idaho. I had been working overtime for months and just wanted some time away from the noise. The cabin was deep in the woods, about 30 miles from the nearest town, and it was advertised as off-grid. That meant no phone signal, no internet, no power lines. Just a wood stove, a generator for lights at night if needed, and a well pump for water. That's exactly what I wanted. Quiet, isolation, and peace. I packed my truck the night before with everything I might need. Clothes, food, bottled water, tools, first aid kit, 2 flashlights with extra batteries, a hunting knife, bear spray, and a pair of hiking boots. I even threw in a few books and a sketch pad. I wanted to disconnect completely. It was about a 6-hour drive from my place. I started out early, just before dawn, and reached the cabin a little after 1 p.m. The cabin sat in a clearing, surrounded by tall pines and birch trees. The structure was old but well maintained. It had a small front porch, a single door, and 2 windows facing out into the woods. Inside was a wood stove, a single bed against the wall, a small table with a couple of chairs, a shelf with old cans of food, and a tiny kitchen area. The back door opened to a trail that led deeper into the forest. There was a tool shed nearby with a rusty lock, and a pile of chopped wood stacked against the cabin. I unloaded my stuff and brought everything inside. I checked the generator and made sure it had fuel. It started with a sputter and came to life. I turned it off right after the check. I wanted to save the fuel for nighttime. I spent the first evening just getting settled. I lit a fire in the stove, made some soup, and sat by the window reading until it got too dark to see. When I finally turned on the generator and flipped the lights, the cabin felt small but cozy. I slept easily that night, the first good sleep I'd had in a while. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee on the gas burner. I sat on the porch for a long time just listening. No cars, no phones, no people. Only the wind through the trees and the occasional bird call. I decided to take a short walk around the area to get familiar with my surroundings. I followed the trail behind the cabin, which cut through thick woods and sloped down toward a small creek. The trail kept going beyond the creek, but I didn't go further that day. I wanted to be back before dark. That evening, I made some pasta and read again by the stove. When the fire burned down, I turned on the generator for a bit and sat with the lights on, just drawing in my sketch pad. The silence was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I liked it. At some point, I heard something rustling outside, maybe 20 feet from the cabin. I figured it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer. I turned off the lights, waited a few minutes, then opened the door and shined my flashlight into the trees. Nothing. I went back inside and locked the door. Just the forest doing what it always does, I thought. The next few days went the same. Hikes in the morning, reading or sketching in the evening, and early sleep. But I started to notice something odd. Each morning when I walked the trail, I saw footprints. Not mine. These weren't boot prints like the ones I made. These were barefoot, human. The prints were faint but definitely visible in the damp earth near the creek. I studied them for a while. The steps were spaced evenly, and they led from the direction of the woods past the creek and then disappeared into thicker brush. I thought maybe someone else was camping nearby, but I hadn't seen any sign of other people. One night, I stayed up later than usual. The fire was burning low, and I was sketching by lantern light. Around midnight, I heard something outside again. This time, it was closer. A slow, crunching sound, like someone stepping on leaves, moving around the side of the cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and the knife. I turned off the lantern, moved slowly to the window, and listened. The steps stopped. I waited. Nothing. I opened the door just a crack and shined the light around. Again, nothing. I stepped out and circled the cabin, heart pounding, light moving across the trees. Still nothing. No movement, no noise. I went back inside and locked the door. I sat by the stove for an hour, listening. It was dead quiet. I tried to shake it off and tell myself it was just my imagination, or maybe some animal walking around. But that night, sleep didn't come easy. Every time I drifted off, I imagined someone outside, just standing there in the dark. The next day, I checked around the cabin. I found more footprints. They circled the cabin this time. Bare feet. The prints were fresh. Too fresh. I hadn't seen or heard anyone nearby since I got there. I felt a cold unease crawl up my spine. I followed the prints back toward the creek, but they vanished in the underbrush. I didn't go farther. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept the lights off and sat by the window with the flashlight and the knife. Around 2 a.m., I saw something move in the trees. A shape low to the ground, just at the edge of the clearing. It didn't move like a person. It crawled, slow and careful, then froze. I watched for a long time, barely breathing. The shape backed away into the woods and disappeared. I packed my bags the next morning. I didn't care if I had booked the cabin for a full week. I needed to leave. I loaded the truck quickly and didn't even eat breakfast. I started driving back the way I came. But about a mile out, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. A figure standing in the road behind me, half covered by the trees. I didn't stop. I kept going. Back home, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a squatter living off-grid. Maybe someone saw my cabin and decided to scare me. But the way it moved, the way it watched the barefoot prints around the cabin, it didn't feel like a prank. I reported it to the local ranger office and gave them the coordinates. They said they'd check it out. They never found anything. No one was living out there. No campsites, no shelters, no tools. Just forest. I haven't gone back to the woods since. I still think about that week sometimes. About the footprints. About the thing I saw crawling at the edge of the clearing. I tell myself it was just a person, maybe sick or hiding. But I know how it felt. I wasn't alone out there. Not for a single night. It was late September when I decided to get away for a while. Life in the city had been getting to me. Constant noise, people everywhere, long hours at work, barely any time to think. I needed silence. Not just quiet, I mean real silence. The kind that sinks into your bones. So I rented a cabin in the mountains, deep in the backwoods of northern Idaho. The place wasn't advertised much, just a small listing I found on an old blog. No fancy photos, just a few lines saying it was isolated, off-grid, and good for hunting and hiking. The cabin was about a 3-hour drive from the nearest town, and even that town was barely more than a gas station, a diner, and a grocery store. After that, the last hour was on a dirt road that climbed and twisted through the trees. No cell service, just endless pine forest, rocky slopes, and the smell of cold, dry air. I felt a weird kind of excitement as I drove, like I was peeling off all the layers of my regular life. The cabin itself looked solid but old. It had a wide porch, wood stacked neatly along one wall, and a metal chimney poking out of the roof. Inside, it was plain, just a single big room with a small bathroom off to the side. There was a fireplace, a small kitchen area, a wooden table, and a bed in the far corner. No TV, no internet, not even a radio. Just the basics. That's what I wanted. I spent the first few days chopping wood, hiking, and reading. I brought a few books, but I found myself just sitting on the porch most evenings, staring into the trees as the sun went down. The quiet was deep. It wasn't just the lack of noise, it was the stillness of everything. No cars, no distant sirens, not even the hum of electricity. Just wind through the trees, and now and then a bird or the crack of a branch somewhere in the woods. By the 4th day, I started noticing small things. The first was the path. There was a narrow trail that led downhill from behind the cabin, and though it was overgrown, it was definitely a man-made trail. I followed it once, and it wound through the trees for maybe a mile before ending at a small, dried-out creek. But the odd thing was the footprints. I saw some old boot prints in the mud, not mine, and not fresh, but recent enough that the edges hadn't been worn away completely. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe the owner of the cabin came by sometimes, or a hunter. Still, I started keeping my eyes open. On the sixth morning, I found a dead rabbit on the porch. It was lying right in the center, like it had been placed there. No blood, no bite marks, just dead. It looked like it had been there a while, but I hadn't seen it the day before. I got rid of it, but the feeling stuck with me. The next night, I thought I heard something outside. I was lying in bed with the fire low, almost asleep, when I heard what sounded like a footstep on the porch. Just one. Then silence. I didn't move. I just stayed still and listened. I couldn't see the porch from the bed, but the thought of someone standing out there, watching, made my chest tight. I waited for a long time. Nothing else happened. In the morning, I checked. There were no footprints, nothing disturbed. Still, I started locking the door at night, even though I hadn't bothered the first few days. I also started sleeping with the hatchet I used for chopping wood nearby. On the 8th day, I went for a long hike up the mountain behind the cabin. It was steep and rough, and I didn't see any signs of people. Just trees, rocks, and scattered animal tracks. I didn't plan to go far, but I kept going, enjoying the climb. At the top, there was a flat ridge with a view that stretched out for miles. I sat there for a while, eating a sandwich and drinking from my water bottle. When I started heading back, I noticed something strange off to the side of the trail. There was an old hunting blind. It was half collapsed and covered in moss, like it hadn't been used in years. But inside, there was a plastic tarp, a pile of beer cans, and a rusty old stove. That wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me were the bones. Animal bones, mostly small ones, rabbits, birds, but cleaned and arranged in a pattern. Circles, lines, stacked in little pyramids. It looked too neat, too intentional. I didn't stay long. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the bones, the rabbit on the porch, the footsteps. Around midnight, I heard something again. This time, it was more than one sound. A footstep, then another, slow and heavy, right outside. Then a thud, like something heavy hit the wall. I got up, grabbed the hatchet, and crept to the window. I didn't see anything. I stood there for almost an hour, heart pounding, watching. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw something move at the edge of the trees. Person. They stepped back into the woods before I could see their face. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I packed my bag. I didn't care if I had another 3 days left. I was leaving, but when I went outside to load the truck, I saw that all 4 tires were slashed. Deep, clean cuts all the way through. I stared at them for a long time, not even angry, just scared. I went back inside and locked the door. I had no way to call for help. No service, no landline. I kept the fire low, stayed away from the windows, and waited for daylight. I thought maybe I could hike out. It would take a whole day, maybe more, but I could make it if I followed the road. But I didn't want to do it at night. The next day, I filled a backpack with food and water, took the hatchet and a flashlight, and started walking. I kept my head down, listening to every sound. The road was quiet, but I had the feeling I was being watched. I didn't see anyone, but that feeling never went away. I hiked until dark, then made a fire and slept against a tree. I didn't sleep much. The second day of walking was harder. My legs were sore, and I had blisters on my feet. But by the afternoon, I saw the edge of the old town, the gas station. I stumbled in, bought a prepaid phone, and called for a tow truck. I didn't tell them the whole story, just said I'd had some car trouble. They took me back up the road to get my truck. When we got there, the cabin looked exactly the same, but there was a new rabbit on the porch. I didn't say anything, just got in the tow truck and left. The driver didn't ask. Later, back in the city, I told a few friends what happened. Most of them said it was probably just some backwoods prank or a squatter. But I know what I saw. I know someone was out there watching, waiting, and I know they didn't want me there. I never went back. I don't even hike alone anymore. And sometimes, when it's quiet, I still think I hear those footsteps outside my window. It was early September when I drove out to the woods in northern Idaho. The air was just starting to change, not quite cold but enough to make me bring a jacket. I had rented a small cabin off a listing I found online. It was one of those privately owned places, off the grid, no neighbors, no cell reception. That was the appeal. I had been working non-stop for over a year and needed to shut everything out. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going, just that I'd be off the radar for a while. The drive took nearly 7 hours from where I lived. The last stretch was on a rough dirt road full of potholes, winding through thick forest. The trees pressed in close, tall and dark, blocking out the sun once it started getting lower in the sky. The GPS lost signal about 40 minutes before I arrived, but the owner had emailed me step-by-step directions with landmarks. I passed an old water tower, a rusted gate chained shut, and finally came to a fork in the road marked with a wooden post and a red ribbon tied around it. I took the right turn like the directions said. The cabin was small but looked solid. Weathered pine boards made up the outside, and the roof was slanted with thick shingles, a steel chimney poking out the top. There was a little porch with a single chair and a fire pit out front. The forest surrounded everything, tall pines and spruces stretching up on all sides. No signs of other people, not even distant engine sounds. Just birds, the wind in the trees, and somewhere in the distance, water trickling, probably a stream. Inside, it was simple. One big room with a bed, a small kitchen area, a wood stove, and a table. The bathroom was off to the side. Nothing fancy. Just a compost toilet and a gravity-fed shower. I unpacked my cooler and backpack, lit a few lanterns, and started a small fire in the stove since the place was already cooling off fast. I spent the first day settling in. I walked around the area, scouted a path down to the stream I'd heard earlier, and tried to get familiar with the surroundings. The trees were so thick it was easy to get turned around, so I stuck to the markers I made using bits of red cloth from my old t-shirt. I boiled water from the stream, cooked some canned food, and read a book until it got too dark to see without the lantern. That night, the silence was overwhelming. I'm used to city noise, sirens, cars, people talking late into the night. Out here, it was just wind and the occasional creak of wood in the cabin. Every now and then I'd hear a branch snap outside, or what sounded like small footsteps, probably raccoons or deer. Still, I kept the hatchet I brought close to the bed. I'd never stayed that far off the grid alone before. The next day, I woke up early and hiked around more. I followed the stream for a while and found animal tracks. Deer mostly, maybe some fox. I didn't bring a gun, just bear spray and a whistle. The sun was out, but it didn't feel warm under the trees. I kept thinking I heard something moving behind me, but when I stopped to listen, it was nothing. That evening, I was chopping wood behind the cabin when I saw something out of place. Broken branches along the tree line, fresh ones, and what looked like a footprint in the dirt near the edge of the woods. It wasn't an animal track. It looked like a boot print. I walked over and studied it. The tread was deep. Someone had been there. It looked recent, maybe earlier that day. I stood there for a while, listening. Nothing, just the wind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I went back to the cabin, locked the door, and stayed inside the rest of the evening. I didn't sleep much. Every noise outside made me sit up and hold my breath. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the cabin. I found more footprints leading around to the back. Whoever it was had come closer. I didn't see any new tracks going away, though. That unsettled me. I packed up some essentials into a small day pack: food, water, the hatchet, and bear spray, and decided to hike back toward the fork in the road where I came in. Maybe there was a hunter nearby. Maybe someone else was camping without my knowledge. I wanted to see if there were any vehicles parked near the main trail. The walk took a couple hours. The trail was harder to follow going back since I hadn't marked it. I didn't see any cars at the fork, no tire tracks either. Just more trees, more silence. I waited around for a bit, hoping maybe someone might drive by, but the road stayed empty. I started heading back. That's when I noticed something strange. Pieces of the red cloth I had tied to mark my way were missing. Not all of them, but some were clearly cut. Clean cuts too, not frayed or torn. Someone had removed them. That meant someone had been following my path, tracking me, I felt my pulse pick up. I kept the hatchet in my hand the whole walk back. Every sound in the woods now felt sharp and deliberate. When I got back to the cabin, the fire pit had been messed with. The ashes were scattered, and the logs I had stacked neatly before were now strewn across the ground. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, nothing looked taken, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't have much to begin with, and I didn't make an inventory. But my backpack had clearly been moved. I had left it leaning against the table, and now it was upright against the wall. That small change hit harder than anything else. Someone had been inside while I was gone. I locked the door, shoved the small dresser in front of it, and stayed up the entire night with the lantern burning. I kept the hatchet close and the bear spray in my lap. Around 2 a.m., I heard movement outside, slow footsteps circling the cabin. The floor creaked when I shifted to peek out through the curtains. I saw nothing. The steps stopped. I stayed like that until morning. My eyes were burning from staying awake. As soon as there was light, I packed my things fast. I wasn't going to wait around. I didn't care if I had booked the cabin for 5 days. I threw everything into the backpack and cooler, doused the fire stove, and headed back toward the car. It was a long walk. When I reached the car, I found a strip of the same red cloth I had tied earlier, tucked under the windshield wiper. It hadn't been there before. It wasn't there when I left the car days ago. My heart started pounding. That meant whoever had been out there knew where my car was. They had followed me all the way from the cabin to the road at some point. I got in fast and locked the doors. The drive out felt endless. Every turn on the dirt road, every bend, I kept checking the mirrors. But I never saw anyone. I made it to the main highway without stopping once. I never went back to the cabin. I reported the whole thing to the website where I rented it, but there wasn't much they could do. The owner claimed no one else should have been there, said the place was in a secured private section of land. I didn't argue. I just blocked the contact and deleted the account. Months later, I looked the place up again. The listing was gone. No sign of it ever being there. No pictures, no owner profile. It was like it had been wiped completely. I haven't gone off-grid since. I still think about the red cloth under my wiper and wonder how long they had been watching me. I had no way of knowing if they were just curious or if they had planned something worse. All I know is I left when I did, and that might have saved my life. I needed a break from everything. The city, the noise, the work. It all became too much. I wasn't sleeping well. My head felt like it never stopped spinning. I was tired all the time, even after a full night in bed. My chest stayed tight, and I just kept feeling like I was one step behind in everything. So when my cousin offered me his cabin for a week, I took it. I didn't ask many questions. He just gave me the directions, handed me the keys, and said it was quiet and out of the way. That's all I needed to hear. I drove up early on a Monday morning. It was about 4 hours from the city, mostly highway, and then another hour through winding back roads. The last stretch was rough. A gravel path with tall trees on both sides that looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. The further I went, the less I could see any signs of life. No houses, no cars, just dense woods pressing in on both sides. My phone signal dropped a little while after turning onto that gravel road. That made me pause for a second, but I told myself it was fine. I was here to disconnect, right? The cabin came into view just as I started wondering if I missed a turn. It was tucked back off the path, surrounded by trees, a little clearing around it. Old wood, small porch, a pile of chopped firewood stacked neatly along one side. The place looked worn, but it was solid. A little rundown, but not in a creepy way. More like something that had seen years of storms and still stood its ground. Inside was simple. One big main room with a couch, a wood stove, and a small kitchen on one end. A hallway led to a bathroom and a small bedroom. That was it. No TV, no Wi-Fi, no neighbors. Just woods and silence. The first night was uneventful. I made a simple dinner, sat on the porch until the sun went down, and then read until I got too tired. The silence was strange, but not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. I kept listening for something, Sirens, cars, people. But there was nothing. The quiet pressed in around the cabin like a blanket. By the second day, I started to relax. I walked a bit into the woods behind the cabin. Not too far, just enough to stretch my legs and get some fresh air. I found an old overgrown trail and followed it for about 20 minutes before turning back. The trees were so thick it was hard to tell how far I'd gone, but everything felt still, peaceful. I barely heard birds, just wind moving through the leaves. That night, though, something shifted. I was in bed, trying to fall asleep. It was late, maybe around midnight. I turned off all the lights, but the moonlight was bright enough to make shadows dance on the floor. I lay there, listening to the wind outside. Then I heard something. It wasn't loud, just a soft crunch, like someone stepping on dried leaves or twigs. I sat up a little and listened. Nothing. I waited, holding my breath, ears wide open. Then I heard it again, a little louder this time, closer, a definite step. I stared at the window but didn't see anything, just the moonlight, trees, and shadows. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, a deer, a raccoon, something small. The woods were full of those, but something about the way the steps sounded, slow, spaced apart, steady, didn't sit right with me. I stayed frozen in bed for maybe half an hour, listening. Nothing else came. Eventually, I drifted off, though I don't remember when. The next morning, I checked outside. I didn't see anything unusual. No tracks. The dirt around the cabin was dry and hard. Not great for showing prints. But I looked anyway. Around the back, toward the woods, along the porch. I didn't find anything that proved someone had been there. But I didn't feel totally at ease. That afternoon, I went further into the woods. I followed the same trail as before, bringing a small backpack with water, a knife, and a flashlight. I just wanted to clear my head. I walked maybe an hour this time. The trees got denser. I didn't see much wildlife, no deer, no birds, not even squirrels. Just silence and that feeling like the woods were watching me. At one point, I stopped to rest on a log, and as I drank from my bottle, I thought I saw something ahead just for a split second. A shape moving between trees. Upright, tall, human-shaped, but it vanished so quickly I couldn't be sure. I stood still for a long time, staring into the trees. Nothing moved, no sound, just wind. I turned back after that, walked a little faster than before. That night, I locked all the doors and windows. I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening for anything. Every creak in the wood, every rustle outside made me sit up. But the night passed without incident. The next day, I found something odd. I was out by the side of the cabin gathering firewood when I noticed a tree near the edge of the clearing had deep scratch marks in it. Long vertical grooves like someone had dragged a blade across the bark. Fresh, not weathered. There were no animals around here that could do that. That's when the feeling in my stomach really started to twist. I stopped exploring the woods. I stayed close to the cabin, kept the knife on me all the time. I double-checked the locks. I started keeping a fire burning in the stove at night, more for comfort than warmth. Every evening I got the sense that something was out there, something just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. Then came the worst night. I was in bed again, the cabin dark except for the faint glow of the coals in the stove. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I woke up to a sound that made my skin crawl. A soft creak from the porch, then another, then a tap, like a finger gently knocking on wood. My mouth went dry. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The sound came again. Top. Tap. Pause. Then slower tap. I sat up slowly and reached for the flashlight beside the bed. I didn't turn it on. I just held it. The cabin was so quiet I could hear my heartbeat. Then I heard its steps. Slow, deliberate. Someone walking around the outside of the cabin. Not rushing, just walking, like they were taking their time. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour. The footsteps eventually stopped, but I didn't get up. I waited until the sun came up before moving. When I finally stepped outside, the first thing I saw was a footprint in the dirt near the steps. A boot print, too big to be mine. Fresh, that was it. I wasn't staying another night. I packed my bags quickly. I left the firewood, the food, everything that didn't matter. I didn't even clean up. I just threw my things in the car and drove back down the gravel path without looking back. About 15 minutes down the road, I finally got a signal on my phone. I pulled over and called my cousin. I asked him about the cabin, if he ever felt watched, if anything weird had happened. He was quiet for a bit, then said he hadn't used it in over a year. He used to go with a friend, but they had a falling out. Said the last time he was there, he thought he saw someone standing deep in the woods, just staring at the cabin. He chalked it up to his imagination. He never went back. I didn't say much after that. I just thanked him and kept driving. Weeks passed. I tried to shake it off, tell myself I'd been paranoid, but something stuck with me. Then one day I got a package in the mail. No return address, just a flash drive inside. I plugged it in. It was full of photos. All of me, sleeping, sitting on the porch, walking in the woods, chopping wood, through the cabin window, from a distance, from the trees. Hundreds of them, taken at different times of day. Some so close they had to be from just a few feet away. The last photo was taken from inside the cabin. From behind me, I haven't slept properly since. I moved apartments, changed my locks, put up cameras, but I still feel it. That feeling from the cabin, that sense of being watched. Every time I hear a floorboard creak or see a shadow move, I think about that last photo, and I wonder if the man behind the cabin ever really stayed there, or if he just moved somewhere closer. It started out as a quiet idea in the back of my mind. Spend a few days alone in a cabin, far away from the city noise and stress. I had taken some time off work. I didn't tell many people, just a couple of coworkers and my neighbor. I needed the silence more than anything. I found the cabin online. It was cheap, nothing fancy. The listing said it was an old forestry cabin up north, used by rangers back in the 1970s, later abandoned and fixed up a bit for rental. The photos looked rustic but livable. I didn't care much for aesthetics. I just needed a place where no one would bother me. The cabin was about 3 hours out of town, then another hour down an unpaved road. The nearest store was about 40 minutes away. The drive there was long and quiet. I barely saw any other cars after getting off the highway. The forest got thicker the deeper I went, and the road turned into a single dirt lane that climbed steadily uphill. It was early October, and the trees had turned into bright yellows and deep reds. Beautiful to look at, but I was more focused on getting there before dark. There was no cell service once I left the main road. When I reached the cabin, it looked more run down than in the pictures. The wood siding was cracked in places, and the windows were dusty, but the door was solid and the lock worked. Inside was one main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, a bathroom, and a bedroom in the back. No TV, no internet. That was fine by me. I unpacked, lit a fire, and made myself some food. The air outside was crisp, and the silence was total. No cars, no hum of electricity, just the forest. The first night passed without issue. I slept hard and deep, the kind of sleep I hadn't had in years. I woke up late the next morning and made coffee on the small propane stove. There was a journal in the drawer by the fireplace. Past guests had written entries. Some were just a few lines, others full pages. Most people had nothing but good things to say. A few complained about mice or creaky floors. One entry stood out though, a short message written in shaky handwriting. Stay inside at night. Do not open the door for anyone. No date, no signature. I brushed it off. Probably someone trying to be funny. The day was uneventful. I took a short hike through the trees behind the cabin. There wasn't a real trail, but the forest was open enough to walk through. I didn't go far, just enough to get a feel of the area. There were no cabins nearby, no signs of people. Only birds and the occasional rustle of animals in the underbrush. That evening, as the sun started to dip, I gathered some firewood. There was a small shed out back with a few chopped logs, but I added some more from fallen branches around the property. As the darkness came in, the forest changed. It felt tighter somehow, as if the trees were leaning in. I tried not to overthink it. I locked the door, drew the curtain, and settled by the fire. Around 11 p.m., just as I was starting to doze off on the couch, I heard something outside, a slow crunch of leaves, then a pause, then another crunch. It wasn't wind or small animals. It sounded like footsteps. I froze and turned down the flame in the lantern. The sound came again, closer now, just outside the window. My heart thudded in my chest. I didn't move. I didn't want to look. There was a slow drag across the side of the cabin. Then nothing. Total silence. I sat there for another hour, not moving. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been a deer or maybe even a bear. I double-checked the door and went to bed, leaving the lantern burning. The next day, I found drag marks in the dirt outside the cabin. Not from claws or hooves. More like something heavy had been pulled. A straight line that came from the woods and stopped at the window, then turned and went back. I felt something cold in my stomach. I stayed close to the cabin all day. I didn't go on a hike. I didn't even leave the porch. That night, the noise came back. This time, it was around 2 a.m. I was in bed, half awake, when I heard the footsteps again. Soft, slow, deliberate. They circled the cabin, then stopped near the front door. I held my breath. There was a soft knock. Not a knock like someone asking to come in. Just one tap, then a second one, then silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the kitchen with a knife in my hand and the fire out. Morning came slow. I made coffee with shaking hands and tried to tell myself I was imagining things. I went outside and looked around.
No prints.
No new marks in the dirt. Nothing. But the silence was heavier now. Even the birds weren't making noise. I took the journal out again and read more entries. Most were cheerful, but in the back, some of the later pages had been torn out. One page was left with a message. 3 nights is the limit. Leave after that. I checked the date. I had already spent 2 nights. I decided I'd leave the next morning. I couldn't explain why exactly. Just a feeling, like the forest didn't want me there anymore. That evening, I packed most of my stuff. I planned to leave at dawn. I kept the fire low and the curtains shut. As the last light faded, I sat in the corner of the cabin with my back against the wall and the knife nearby. I didn't sleep. I watched the door. Around midnight, I heard movement again. This time it was faster, not just slow walking. It was like someone or something was running in circles around the cabin. Then it stopped. Then came the sound of scratching, like nails on wood. Then pounding, heavy, open-handed slaps against the walls, the windows, the door. It went on for 10 minutes. Then it stopped, all at once. I stayed frozen in place until the sky started to lighten. I didn't even grab the rest of my stuff. I just took my bag and left. I jogged to my car, unlocked it with shaking hands, and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the highway and saw other vehicles. I didn't even feel safe until I was back in the city. Later that week, I went online to look up the cabin again. The listing was gone, deleted. I tried to trace it back through my email, but the contact information had disappeared. No history, no reviews. It was like it had never existed. I never went back. I still don't understand what I experienced. I never saw anyone. Nothing ever tried to break in. But I know I wasn't alone out there. There was something in those woods. Not a ghost, not a monster. Something real. Person maybe. Someone watching. Someone who waits for people to come, stay a few nights, and leave in fear. I've never gone camping alone again, and I never will. Sometimes at night, I hear sounds outside my apartment, like someone standing still just beyond my window. I try not to look. I always lock the door before bed now. Always. It started on a cold Thursday morning in late October. I had taken time off work because I needed to get away from everything. My job had been weighing on me. My phone was constantly buzzing with emails and messages, and I hadn't slept properly in weeks. I needed silence. I needed to be somewhere where no one could reach me. So, I rented an isolated cabin deep in the forested hills of northern Vermont. It was far away from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but trees, dirt roads, and silence. The drive out there was long. After leaving the highway, I had to follow a series of rough gravel roads that twisted through dense woods. The GPS lost signal about halfway there, and I had to rely on printed directions. The trees got taller, and the sun disappeared behind the thick canopy. I passed no other cars. By the time I arrived, my tires were covered in dust, and my hands were sore from gripping the steering wheel too hard. The cabin was old but sturdy. A single-story wooden structure with a steep roof and a small porch out front. It sat in a clearing that looked like it had been hacked out of the forest a long time ago. The trees came right up to the edges of the property. There were no neighbors, no fences, and no cell signal. That was exactly what I had wanted. Inside, it was simple. One bedroom, a small kitchen, a fireplace, and an old generator out back that powered the few lights and the mini fridge. There was a wood stove in the corner, a pile of chopped logs stacked against the wall. A creaky wooden floor stretched across the space. There was no TV, no radio, and no internet. I felt a strange peace just standing inside it. That first day, I unpacked my food and supplies, started a fire in the stove, and just sat in the quiet. I listened to the wind brushing the trees outside. I made some canned soup and ate it with crackers, then read a paperback novel by lantern light until my eyes felt heavy. I fell asleep early that night, wrapped in thick blankets, with only the sound of the wind outside. I woke up just before dawn, not because of a noise, but because of a feeling. Something felt off. The air in the cabin felt different. I lay still for a while, trying to figure it out. The fire in the stove had gone out, and the cabin was cold. I got up to add more logs, and as I moved past the front window, I noticed something strange. There were boot prints in the dirt just outside the porch. I hadn't left any. When I arrived, I drove straight up and walked from the car into the cabin. The ground had been undisturbed. These prints looked fresh, like someone had walked right up to the front door in the night. I stepped outside, feeling the cold morning air hit my face, and crouched down to look. There were 6 clear prints, coming from the woods and stopping at the porch. Then nothing. No prints going away. Just 6 large boot marks in the dirt. No animal tracks, no other signs of movement. Just those prints. I didn't panic. Not right away. I figured maybe they were old and I hadn't noticed them. Maybe a hiker had passed through before I arrived. I went back inside and made coffee on the gas stove, trying to ignore the unease growing in my stomach. But that unease stayed with me all day. I kept checking the woods, walking the edge of the clearing to see if anyone was out there. I found nothing, just trees, rocks, and silence. That night, I locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle, just in case. I left a hatchet next to my sleeping bag. The second night, I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, listening to the creaks of the cabin, the wind, the distant rustle of leaves. At one point, I thought I heard something walking outside. Slow footsteps, crunching leaves. I stayed in bed, not even breathing. Eventually, it stopped. The next morning, I checked the ground again. New prints, not in the same spot. This time, they were near the back window, the one over the kitchen sink. Again, the same boots, the same depth. No tracks leading away, just those few steps, like someone had walked up, stood there, and left without leaving a trail. Now I was starting to get scared. I looked over the whole area again. I walked into the woods a little, hoping to find more signs, but the leaves and brush were undisturbed. I had this crawling feeling in my back, like someone was watching me, but I never saw anyone. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the chair, hatchet on my lap, the fire burning low. I kept listening. The wind had picked up, and the trees swayed outside. Every crack and groan of the cabin made me jump. At one point, I thought I saw something move past the window, but when I looked, it was gone. The next morning, I made the decision to leave early. I had planned to stay 5 nights, but this was only the 3rd morning, and I felt like something wasn't right. I packed my things quickly. When I stepped outside to load the car, I noticed something new. Scratches. Long, deliberate scratches on the wooden frame of the cabin door. Deep ones, as if someone had dragged a knife or a key across the surface. They weren't there the day before. I touched them with my fingers. They were fresh. I threw my bag in the trunk and tried to start the car. The engine cranked but didn't turn over. I tried again. Nothing. The battery was dead. I had checked it when I arrived, and it had been fine. Now it was dead. I opened the hood, but I didn't know enough about cars to fix it. I went back into the cabin, shaking. My hands were cold and sweating at the same time. I looked at the old landline phone in the corner. I had tested it when I arrived, and it hadn't worked. Now I picked it up again and listened. Still dead. I had two choices, wait it out or walk. The nearest town was about 11 miles down the dirt road. I had brought a map with me, so I grabbed it, packed some food and water, and started walking. I kept checking behind me, expecting to see someone following. The woods were too quiet. I felt like the trees were hiding something. Every branch that snapped made me jump. After about 3 miles, I heard something behind me. It wasn't loud, just a soft crunch. I stopped, listened, nothing. Then I heard it again. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. I started walking faster, then running. I ran for almost a mile before I stopped to catch my breath. My legs were burning. I crouched behind a fallen tree, trying to stay quiet. I waited, watching the woods. I didn't see anyone. Finally, after hours of walking, I reached the edge of town. I made it to a gas station and explained what happened. They called a tow truck, and the driver took me back to the cabin. When we got there, the door was open. Inside, things were moved. Not a mess, but just slightly off. My blankets were on the floor. The wood I had stacked was scattered. A chair was overturned, but nothing was taken. The tow driver said it might have been an animal, maybe a bear, but bears don't scratch doors like that. They don't walk in boots. They don't move things and then leave. I left that day. I never went back. The cabin owner called me 2 weeks later, asking why I hadn't cleaned up. I didn't tell him the full story. I just said there was a problem with the car and I had to leave quickly. That was 8 months ago. Since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking about those boot prints, about the scratches, about the feeling that someone was standing just outside, watching. I don't know who it was, or what they wanted, but I do know this. I wasn't alone out there. Someone was watching me, waiting, maybe just playing games, maybe something worse. But I got out. I walked away. I still have nightmares about it sometimes, but I'm safe now. I live in a busy neighborhood. I keep my doors locked, even in the daytime. I bought security cameras, because if someone could walk that close to me in the woods without me ever hearing them, they could do it again. It was late September when I decided to spend a week alone at my uncle's old cabin. I needed space. Work had drained me, my relationship was on the rocks, and my head just wasn't in a good place. The cabin was deep in the woods, about a 3-hour drive from my apartment in the city, and after another hour on a rough gravel road, I reached the gate. Trees surrounded the area so thickly that I couldn't see the sky in most places. The sun was already dipping low when I pulled up to the cabin. The place was more run down than I remembered. My uncle hadn't been there in years, and it showed. The paint was peeling from the wooden walls. The roof looked like it had taken a beating, and the porch creaked under my weight. I unlocked the door using the spare key. He told me he hid in the old birdhouse nailed to a pine tree. The air inside smelled like dust, pine, and old newspapers. I dropped my bag and took a walk around the inside. There was a small kitchen with a gas stove and a rusted sink, a tiny bathroom, and a single bedroom with a full-sized bed covered in a faded quilt. No TV, no internet, no cell signal. I didn't even have radio service. That was the point, though. I wanted to be alone, disconnected from everything. The first night was uneventful. I heated up some canned chili, lit a fire in the old stone fireplace, and read an old paperback I found on the shelf. I was asleep by 10. The sounds of the forest were loud outside, crickets, leaves rustling, the occasional snap of a twig, but nothing that bothered me. The next day I went for a hike. There were trails I remembered from visiting as a kid, though they were a lot more overgrown now. I followed one for about an hour until I reached a small clearing with a fallen tree. I sat there for a while, watching the breeze move through the grass and the sunlight dance across the moss. It was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I felt my shoulders relax. That night, something changed. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound outside. It wasn't loud, just strange, like something dragging across the wooden porch. I lay still for a while, thinking it was probably a raccoon or a deer. Then I heard what sounded like slow, heavy steps, one after another, not quick like an animal, steady, human-like. My heart started racing. I sat up in bed, listening. The footsteps moved toward the door, then stopped. I stared at the front door from my bed, barely breathing. After a few minutes, nothing else happened.
Nonak.
No more movement. Eventually, I convinced myself it was my imagination or an animal and managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, I stepped outside to check. The dirt around the porch was disturbed, but I couldn't make out any clear footprints. Could have been anything. Still, it bothered me. I spent most of that day inside, chopping wood, organizing supplies, and keeping myself busy. That night, I locked the door, closed the shutters, and kept the fire going. I didn't sleep well. Around 3 a.m., I heard the sound again. This time, it was closer to the bedroom window. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. I didn't move for a long time. Then I heard a light tapping, just a single tap, then another. It sounded like fingernails on glass. I froze. The window didn't have curtains, just blinds, and I was too scared to get up and look. After what felt like forever, the tapping stopped. In the morning, I checked the window. Nothing. No marks.
No footprints. No scratches.
But I knew I heard something. I didn't sleep at all the next night. I sat in a chair near the fireplace, wide awake, gripping the flashlight I kept with me. The wind picked up that night, and the trees made long creaking sounds. At one point, I thought I heard movement near the back door. I got up, walked slowly to the door, and turned on the outside light. Nothing, just woods. By the 5th day, I was exhausted. I had barely slept, and I kept getting the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every time I stepped outside, I felt watched, like there were eyes on me from behind the trees. I stopped going far into the woods. I stayed close to the cabin, but the feeling didn't go away. I kept the axe nearby now just in case. That afternoon, I walked around the cabin and found something that shook me. Behind the cabin, where the grass was taller, I found a set of deep, heavy footprints. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. And they weren't mine. They were much larger. And the strange thing was they just stopped, like whoever made them had been standing there, looking at the cabin, and then just turned around and left. I followed them for a while, but they disappeared into the thicker brush. That night, I didn't light a fire. I sat in the dark, listening. Around midnight, I heard something again. Not just steps this time. Breathing. Heavy, slow breathing. Right outside the wall where the bedroom was. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just sat in the dark, frozen. The breathing lasted for a few minutes. Then it stopped. But I didn't move until daylight. The next day, I packed. I had planned to stay another 2 nights, but I couldn't take it anymore. I was tired, scared, and done. I loaded my bag, locked the cabin, and started the drive out. The road felt longer this time. I kept checking my rearview mirror. Every time I thought I saw movement behind the trees, I felt my chest tighten. I just wanted to be back on the main road. When I finally made it to the highway, I pulled over and sat there for a long time. I was safe. Nothing had happened, but it felt like something had been watching me that whole time. Something had been near the cabin every night. And the worst part was I would never know who or what it was. Maybe it was just some local messing with me. Maybe it was a drifter. Maybe it was all in my head from being alone too long. But I didn't care anymore. When I got home, I threw away the cabin key and told my uncle I wasn't going back. He didn't ask why. I didn't explain. But that week changed me. I stopped going on solo trips. I never stayed anywhere remote again. Even in my apartment, I keep the windows locked, and I always check outside before I sleep. I still don't know what I heard or saw out there, but I know it was real. I know something was near that cabin, watching, waiting, and I'm just glad I left when I did. I don't know what might have happened if I stayed one more night. It was the first week of October when I drove up to a secluded cabin in northern Montana. I had found the listing online, a private off-grid place with no Wi-Fi, no phone signal, nothing. Just trees, cold air, and silence. It was about a 6-hour drive from where I lived, and I had taken time off work specifically to get away from everything. I didn't want to see anyone, hear anyone, or be around any screens. I packed everything I needed: non-perishable food, water jugs, a few extra blankets, and a small emergency kit. My car was packed tight, but I was determined to spend a full week out there alone. The cabin sat a few miles off a gravel road. The last bit of the path was barely drivable, full of rocks and dips, but I made it slowly. There was a small clearing in the trees, and right in the middle was the cabin. It looked just like the photos: weathered wood, tin roof, one small porch, one door, and 2 shuttered windows. Behind it, trees stretched for miles. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made your own breathing sound loud. Inside, the cabin was simple. There was a cot on one side with a thick sleeping bag already rolled out. A small wood-burning stove sat in the middle. There was a table with 2 chairs and a little cabinet that held a few old pots and pans. I checked everything twice. No electricity, no running water. The outhouse was about 20 feet out the back. I liked it, though. Felt right. That first day was just getting settled. I stacked the woodpile outside, filled the water containers I brought, and made a small meal of canned chili and bread. The sun went down around 6. It got cold fast. I lit the stove and wrapped myself in a thick hoodie, listening to the popping of the fire. The first night was fine. I slept okay. Woke up a few times just from the unfamiliar creaks and pops of the old cabin, but nothing too strange. I was more excited than nervous. Felt like I was doing something good for myself. The second day, I went on a short hike around the area. I followed a dried-up stream bed that curved behind the cabin and led deeper into the woods. I had my compass and map and made sure not to go too far. I saw a few deer tracks, found some old rusty cans and glass bottles, probably from hunters or campers a long time ago, but no sign of recent activity. But when I got back to the cabin, something felt off. I can't explain it. Nothing looked disturbed. My stuff was all where I left it, but I just felt like someone had been there. I checked the door. It was still locked. I even circled around the cabin, looked for footprints. Nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep well. I kept hearing small noises outside. Twigs snapping, what sounded like soft shuffling near the porch. Every time I got up and opened the door, I didn't see anything. I thought maybe it was just raccoons or other animals. Still, I kept the hatchet next to my sleeping bag, just in case. On the third day, I didn't go hiking. I stayed close, just stacking wood and trying to relax. I read a bit from an old book I brought, then sat outside for a while. It was colder now. I could see my breath even in the afternoon. At one point, I thought I saw someone through the trees, far off. Just a quick glimpse, maybe a tall figure moving between the trees. But when I stood up and stared, there was nothing. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Being alone does that to people. That night, things got worse. Around 2 a.m., I woke up because I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps on the porch. Not animal sounds, human footsteps, slow and heavy. I stayed completely still, breathing shallow. The steps stopped right outside the door. I couldn't see anything from where I was lying. I thought about shining my flashlight, but I didn't want to make any noise. After a while, the steps moved away, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I found muddy boot prints on the porch. They were big, like size 12 or 13. I don't wear boots that big, and they were fresh, still wet. I checked the surrounding area and found more prints leading into the woods, but they disappeared into the underbrush. I started to get scared. I kept trying to tell myself maybe it was a hunter passing through. But why would anyone be out here in the middle of the night? And why didn't they knock or say anything? I considered packing up and leaving, but I had told myself I'd stay a full week. and I still had 3 days left, so I stayed. But from that point on, I kept my knife on me at all times, and I slept with one eye open. That night, I heard the footsteps again, but this time, they walked around the cabin slowly, circling it. I heard them crunch through leaves, stop at the window, then move again. I didn't get up. I just lay still, heart pounding. At one point, I heard something tap against the window shutters. Not banging, just a light tap tap tap. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I made a decision. I packed my bag, loaded the car, and got ready to leave. But when I got in the car and turned the key, nothing happened. The battery was dead, completely dead. I hadn't left the lights on or anything, so I didn't understand how it could have drained that fast. I popped the hood, checked the battery cables, and noticed something strange. One of the cables had been cut, clean like with a knife. I stood there in the cold, trying not to panic. Someone had done that. Someone had been messing with me, watching me. I checked the car for other damage, but everything else looked fine. I had no phone signal, no way to call anyone. The nearest road was about 6 miles out. I could walk it, but it would take time, and I didn't like the idea of walking through those woods knowing someone might be out there watching. Still, I couldn't stay. So I grabbed my backpack, filled my water bottle, and started walking. I left a note in the cabin saying I was leaving and which direction I went, just in case someone came looking later. The walk was long. I kept looking over my shoulder, hearing things that probably weren't there. A few times, I thought I saw someone far behind me, but it was always just movement in the trees. About halfway to the road, I found something that stopped me cold. A small pile of rocks stacked neatly in the middle of the path. On top was one of my socks. I had left that sock hanging inside the cabin to dry the day before. That meant someone had been inside. I didn't wait. I started jogging. My legs were burning. My heart was pounding, but I didn't stop. I made it to the road about 2 hours later, soaked in sweat and shaking. I flagged down a pickup truck that came by, and the man inside gave me a ride to the nearest gas station, about 20 minutes away. I called the sheriff's department from there. They sent a deputy to go check the cabin. Later that day, he called me back, said there were boot prints around the cabin, signs someone had been sleeping outside behind it. They even found a few cigarette butts and an old backpack tucked behind a tree. But no one was there. He said they'd keep an eye on the area, but it wasn't illegal to be on public land. They couldn't do much unless someone got hurt. I never went back. I didn't even go pick up the car. I had it towed later. I still don't know who was out there or what they wanted. Maybe they were just messing with me. Maybe they were planning something worse. All I know is that if I had stayed another night, I don't think I would have made it back. After that trip, I started locking every door twice. I got cameras for my house. I even moved to a more populated area. I still hike, still go into nature sometimes, but never alone, and never without a way to get help. Some people think being out in the wild is peaceful, and it is, until you realize you're not as alone as you thought. I was never the type of person who liked going off the grid. I didn't grow up hunting, fishing, or hiking. I liked being where there was Wi-Fi, grocery stores, neighbors. But that changed a bit after the pandemic. Working from home, stuck inside for months, made me start craving the outdoors. I wanted quiet. I wanted space. I wanted to stop hearing sirens, car alarms, and voices through my apartment walls. That's how I ended up booking a cabin deep in the northern woods of Wisconsin. It was a solo trip, a week off work, and I thought it would be peaceful. The listing said the place was about 30 minutes from the nearest gas station. No neighbors for miles. It came with a wood stove, a small dock, and a little shed out back. The pictures showed a well-maintained log cabin, tall pine trees, a calm lake. It looked like something off a postcard. I thought it'd be the perfect place to read, sleep in, maybe try fishing. I didn't think twice. I arrived around 4 p.m. on a Monday. The drive had been long. Cell service had cut out after I passed the last town, and the last 5 miles were on gravel roads through thick woods. When I pulled into the clearing and saw the cabin, I was relieved. It looked just like the photos. Small, sturdy, with smoke coming from the chimney. I found the key under a stone frog by the steps like the owner had said. I unpacked fast, just one duffel bag and a cooler, and sat out on the porch with a beer, watching the sun drop through the trees. The first night was quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear your heartbeat. I thought it'd bother me, but it didn't. I slept better than I had in months. The only sound I remember was the creaking of wood as the cabin settled, which made sense in an old structure like that. On the second day, I explored the area. There was a small trail behind the cabin that led down to the lake. The lake was glassy and calm, surrounded by thick trees and reeds. I sat on the dock for a while, watching a loon dive under the surface, and then walked back up. Behind the cabin, near the tree line, was the shed. It was padlocked. The listing had mentioned the shed, but said it was for storage and not to be opened. I hadn't thought much of it. The shed was small, about the size of a large closet, and made of weathered gray wood. The lock was new, though thick and shiny. That contrast stood out. It was the only thing around the cabin that didn't look old or worn. I didn't go near it. I just looked at it for a second, then walked back inside and made lunch. That night, I kept hearing a sound. At first, I thought it was just branches moving in the wind, but it had a rhythm. Soft thuds, slow, spaced apart. I lay still, listening. Then it stopped. After a while, I convinced myself it was probably just an animal, a raccoon or maybe a deer bumping into something. The next morning, I stepped out back to stretch. That's when I saw something odd. The ground in front of the shed looked different, like the dirt had been disturbed.
I walked over.
There were boot prints, not mine. Larger, deeper, fresh. They led straight to the shed and then stopped. I looked around, expecting to see more, but there were only a few steps in and out, like someone had stood in front of the door for a while, then backed away. I didn't know what to think. Could have been from before I arrived. Maybe the owner had come by recently and forgot to mention it. Still, it made me uneasy. I walked a slow lap around the cabin, checking all the windows and doors. Nothing looked tampered with. Still, I locked the front door and kept the curtains closed the rest of the day. Later, I went for a walk down the lake trail again, trying to clear my head. But even then I felt watched, like something was sitting out there in the woods just far enough that I couldn't see it. It made me hurry back. That night, the thudding sound came again. Closer this time, louder. It was steady, like someone knocking gently. But I was alone, and I hadn't heard any car pull up. I sat in bed holding my breath. Stopped again after a while, just like before. The next morning, I found something new. A dead rabbit was lying by the shed. Its neck was broken. There was no blood, no signs of a fight. Just the limp body stretched out in front of the door. It hadn't been there the day before. I could tell it was fresh, still warm. I didn't touch it. I backed away and went inside. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just thinking. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence. Fox could have dropped it, but something didn't add up. Why right there? Why no tracks? I couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant to be seen. I looked up the owner's email on my phone, but had no service. I had to wait until I drove into town. That meant going the entire day and night without help. I thought about leaving right then, but I didn't want to panic over what could just be animals. I stayed close to the cabin all day, barely eating, constantly checking the windows. As the sun dropped, I set a fire in the stove and sat with my back to the wall, listening. Sometime after midnight, the knocking came back, but this time it wasn't on the shed. It was on the side of the cabin. 3 knocks, slow, solid. I froze, then silence. I waited, heart pounding, gripping the fire poker. Nothing. I didn't sleep at all. I sat awake until the light started creeping in. When it was finally morning, I opened the front door and stepped out. The ground was damp. It had rained briefly before dawn, perfect for tracks. I walked around the cabin and found them, more boot prints, same size as before. They came from the trees, went up to the wall, then turned around and vanished back into the woods. I didn't care if it was a prank or someone lost in the woods. I threw my bag into the car and left. But the road was wet and muddy, and my car, a small sedan, slid into a shallow ditch on a turn just a few minutes from the cabin. I was stuck. I tried rocking the car, putting branches under the tires. Nothing worked. I didn't have signal, and walking back to the cabin felt like the only option. I didn't like it, but it beat wandering into the woods in case someone was really out there. So I walked back up the road, every step slower than the last. The cabin looked exactly the same. Nothing had changed. I stayed inside most of the day, checking my phone for service every hour. I tried climbing a small hill behind the shed thinking maybe I'd get a signal up there. Still nothing. But from that spot, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Behind the shed, covered partly by leaves and brush, was what looked like an old trail. Narrow, hard to see, but definitely man-made. I should have ignored it. I should have walked away, but I felt pulled. Like if I understood where that trail went, I might understand why things felt wrong here. I followed it. It led down a shallow slope, winding through tight trees. About 15 minutes in, I saw something. A structure, half collapsed, covered in moss and vines. An old hunting blind. Inside, half buried under leaves, was a tarp. Under the tarp were bones. I didn't get close. I didn't touch anything, but I saw enough. A shoe, half rotted. Fabric, something that looked like a jawbone. I turned and ran. I tripped twice on roots, scratched my arms on branches, but didn't stop. I got back to the cabin soaked in sweat and dirt. I locked the door, shoved furniture in front of it, and waited. That night, I didn't hear any knocking, but I didn't sleep either. At dawn, I grabbed the emergency flare the cabin had by the fireplace and hiked up the road until I found an open stretch and fired it. A couple hours later, a forest ranger's truck rolled up. He helped tow me out. I told him I'd gotten scared, that I wasn't used to being alone in the woods. I didn't mention the bones. I didn't say a word about the shed or the knocking. I just thanked him and drove away as fast as I could. Back home, I tried to look up anything about missing people in that area. I found a local forum post from 2016 about a hiker who disappeared near a lake. No follow-up, no answers, no names. I never heard from the cabin owner again. They didn't reply to my email. The listing disappeared. Months later, I got a call from a blocked number. I didn't answer. No message was left. I moved shortly after that. I haven't gone into the woods since. I don't hike, camp, or even drive through forests anymore. Something about that place still feels unfinished, like a door was open that I never meant to unlock. And that shed? I still think about what might have been inside, but I'm glad I never found out. Started as a short break from work. I needed to get away from the noise, the traffic, the notifications, and people in general. I was tired of sitting behind a desk for 12 hours straight, barely getting sleep, always looking at a screen. I was mentally drained, and my body was giving up too. I searched online for a remote place to stay, something off the grid. I didn't want to hear a single horn or the buzz of a phone. I wanted trees, birds, maybe the sound of a river, and nothing else. I found a small cabin about 4 hours north of where I lived. It was listed on a site that people usually don't go to unless they're looking for places without plumbing or power. It looked old but clean. The pictures showed a wooden cabin surrounded by forest, with a dirt path leading to it and a small shed a little distance away. There was a small fireplace inside, a cot, a table, and not much else. It looked like exactly what I needed. I booked it for 5 days. The drive there was long and quiet. The further I got from the city, the more I could feel the weight dropping off my shoulders. The air smelled different. I rolled the windows down and let it hit my face. I didn't even play music. Just the sound of the tires rolling over the dirt roads was enough. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was halfway down. The trees around it were thick and tall, and I could barely see the sky through the leaves. I parked the car a little distance away since the road didn't go all the way to the door. I grabbed my backpack, my cooler, and a few essentials and walked the rest of the way. The cabin was smaller than I expected but looked solid. The wood was dark and old but not rotten. There were a few steps leading up to the door. Inside, it smelled like dust and pine. There were some cobwebs in the corners, but it looked like no one had used it in a while. I opened the windows to air it out and dropped my bag on the cot. There was no power, just a couple of battery-powered lanterns and a pile of firewood in a box. I lit one of the lanterns and placed it on the table. That first night, I felt peace. I made a small fire outside in the stone circle beside the cabin and heated up a can of beans. I ate slowly, just staring into the flames. The air was cool but not cold. I could hear insects and the occasional owl. Felt like I had gone back in time. No buzzing phones, no news, no screens. Just darkness, flames, and the forest. I went inside when it got too cold and laid down on the cot. Creaked a bit, but it was firm enough. I left one lantern on and dozed off listening to the wind in the trees. I woke up once in the middle of the night because I thought I heard something. It sounded like footsteps outside, slow and steady. But when I sat up and listened, it was just branches shifting in the wind. Maybe a squirrel. I told myself not to be paranoid. I was in the woods. Animals move. Trees creak. I went back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up early. My body felt rested in a way it hadn't in months. I made coffee over a small portable stove and sat outside again, just watching the forest. There were tracks in the dirt, probably deer or something similar. I walked a little way into the woods but didn't go too far. I didn't want to get lost. I found a flat rock near a stream and sat there for a while. It was quiet, not dead silent, just peaceful. Birds chirped. The water trickled. I saw a fox on the other side of the stream, but it didn't come close. That night, I fell asleep fast. But again, something woke me. It wasn't loud. It was more like a feeling, like I wasn't alone. I sat up and listened. Nothing, but I could feel it. I got up and went to the window. The lantern was dim, but I could see the outline of trees. That's when I noticed something strange. The firewood box outside had been moved. It wasn't where I left it. It was only a few feet away, but it had definitely shifted. I stared at it for a long time. Could it be an animal? But that box was heavy. I had to use both hands to carry it. The next day, I checked around the cabin. No tracks, at least none I could recognize. I wasn't a tracker or anything, but the ground was mostly dry dirt and some old leaves. Nothing really stuck. I shook it off. Maybe I had moved the box myself and just forgot. I kept telling myself that, but part of me didn't believe it. On the third night, things changed. I had gone to sleep like normal. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of the shed door creaking. It was a long, slow sound, like rusty hinges moving. I froze. I had never opened the shed. I didn't even check what was in it. I figured it was just tools or junk. But now I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing that door. I got up slowly and turned off the lantern. My eyes adjusted to the dark. I went to the window. The moonlight was weak, but I could just barely make out the outline of the shed. The door was open. I could see it swinging slightly. Something about it made my stomach turn. I watched for a while, expecting something to come out, but nothing did. Eventually, I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I decided to check the shed. I waited until the sun was fully up. I walked over, heart pounding. The door was still open. Inside, it was dark and smelled of damp wood. There were old tools, some rusted gardening equipment, a broken chair, and a few crates. One crate had a small hunting knife in it. I took it and kept it with me just in case. That day, I felt uneasy, like something had shifted. I didn't go far from the cabin. I kept looking over my shoulder. Every time the wind rustled the trees, I flinched. When night came, I lit a fire inside the cabin and kept the knife close. I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing soft sounds like scratching or dragging. But when I sat up, it stopped. On the fourth day, I found something that made my blood run cold. I had walked behind the cabin to relieve myself. That's when I saw it. There was a piece of cloth caught on a branch. It was gray and torn, like part of a jacket or shirt. It looked old. There was dried brown stuff on it. I didn't want to assume it was blood, but it looked like it. The cloth was high up on the branch, too high for any animal to have placed it there. I backed away slowly. I didn't touch it. I went back to the cabin and locked the door. I sat on the cot with the knife in my hand and tried to think. I told myself it could have been from a hiker. Maybe someone got hurt. Maybe it had been there for years. But the fear didn't go away. That night, the scratching came back. This time it was louder. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was on the roof. I could hear it clearly. Slow dragging, then a pause, then more dragging. I sat there in the dark, heart pounding, holding the knife tight. The cabin had no attic, no crawl space, just the roof above me. I didn't dare go outside. I waited, listening. After about 20 minutes, it stopped. At dawn, I climbed out the window to check the roof. I used a fallen log to get a better view. The roof had long scratches on it, like something had dragged metal across it. It wasn't from a branch or animal. The lines were too deep and clean. I felt like throwing up. I packed my things. I didn't care that I had one more night left. I wasn't staying. I threw everything in my bag and rushed to the car. The drive back was fast and tense. I kept checking the mirror, half expecting something to follow me. But nothing did. When I got home, I took the longest shower of my life. I scrubbed myself until my skin turned red. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I never went back there. A month later, I checked the listing for the cabin. It was gone. Not just booked, completely removed. I think about it sometimes, usually at night. The shed door, the dragging on the roof, the cloth on the branch. Someone had been out there, or maybe still was. I don't know what they wanted, but I know I wasn't supposed to be there, and I know I was being watched. That trip was supposed to help me find peace, but all it did was remind me that some places are better left alone. No one should stay in a place where the walls are too thin, the woods too quiet, and the roof carries sounds that don't belong. It was a cold October morning when I drove up the narrow road into the hills of Central Oregon. The sky was overcast, thick gray clouds hanging low over the tops of the trees, and everything smelled like wet pine. I was heading to an old cabin I'd rented for a week. I found it on a listing site that mostly catered to off-grid, remote locations. That's what I wanted. Total isolation. No phone service, no internet, no one around for miles. Just trees, a fireplace, and the sound of the wind. The cabin was about 15 miles off the main highway. The dirt road leading to it hadn't been maintained in a long time, and my tires kicked up mud and small stones the whole way. I passed a wooden sign that was mostly rotted, with some letters still barely visible. It might have once said, Forest Service Road 28, but now it looked like something out of a forgotten place. I kept going until I saw the cabin, hidden among thick trees, sitting alone near the edge of a small ravine. It was smaller than I expected. Just one floor with a small porch out front, its wood dark with age and moisture. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, and there was moss growing along the edges. I parked my car off to the side, next to a fallen log. The silence hit me as soon as I stepped out. No distant cars, no people, just the wind through the trees and a faint dripping from somewhere in the forest. Inside, the cabin smelled like damp wood and old ash. There was a small wood stove in the corner, a table, a single bed against the far wall, and some shelves with dusty dishes and canned food. The place looked like it hadn't been used in years, but it was dry and still. I unpacked my gear. A backpack, some dry food, water jugs, a flashlight, some books, and a hunting knife I always carried when going off-grid. The first 2 days were peaceful. I chopped some firewood out back, read during the day, and hiked along the trail that ran behind the cabin. It was easy to forget about the world here, but by the third day, things started to feel wrong. That morning, I noticed tracks in the mud behind the cabin. At first, I figured they were just animal prints, but the shape wasn't familiar. They were wide, with what looked like a flat sole and small ridges around the edge. Almost like boot prints, but not quite. They didn't look like anything I'd seen before, and they weren't there the night before. I followed them for about 30 feet before they just stopped. No turn, no return tracks, just gone. The soil was soft enough that any step would have left a mark, but the trail ended in the middle of the clearing. I stood there a long time trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was someone messing around, but I hadn't seen another person since I arrived. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The wind had picked up and kept tapping tree branches against the walls. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard something outside. Not an animal, not wind. Something steady, like footsteps circling the cabin. I sat up in bed, held my breath, and listened. It went on for a long time, then stopped. I waited another hour before I fell back asleep. The next morning, I found a deep scratch in the wood of the front door. It wasn't huge, just long and deep, like something had dragged metal along it. I checked all around the cabin. Nothing else looked disturbed, but I had the same uneasy feeling in my gut that I'd had since I saw the tracks. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it had always been there, and I hadn't noticed. On the 5th day, I went for a long hike to clear my head. I followed the trail past the ravine and down into a thicker part of the woods. The trees here were older and denser, and the light barely made it through. It felt like walking through a tunnel of moss and branches. About an hour in, I found a clearing with a rusted-out camper shell sitting on flat tires, half sunk into the earth. It looked like it had been there for decades. I walked around it and peeked inside. The windows were shattered, and everything inside was rotted. Mold-covered cushions, broken cabinets, an old lantern rusted into a corner. There were no signs anyone had been there recently, but something about it made me feel like I shouldn't be standing there. I turned around and started back. As I walked, I noticed that the woods had gone completely quiet. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my own boots. It stayed that way the entire way back. That evening, when I reached the cabin, the front door was slightly open. I was sure I'd locked it. I always locked it. Inside, everything looked normal at first, but one of my water jugs had been moved. Not spilled, just moved about 2 feet from where I'd left it. My hunting knife, which I'd left on the table, was gone. I searched the whole place twice and didn't find it. I was shaken. I kept telling myself I'd misplaced it or forgotten something, but I knew I hadn't. That night, I barely slept. I kept the oil lamp burning and sat in the chair facing the door. Every creak of the cabin made my skin crawl. Around 3 a.m., I heard something heavy step onto the porch. The wood creaked under the weight, slow and deliberate. One step, then another, then silence. I didn't move. I just sat frozen, heart racing, until the first light of morning. By then, I'd made up my mind to leave early. I started packing as soon as the sun rose, shoving everything back into my bag. I checked the car. It was untouched, but as I loaded my stuff in, I noticed something new. Small, thin sticks had been arranged on the hood. They were bent into shapes, circles, triangles, and one that looked like a star. I swept them off quickly, heart pounding. I drove fast down the muddy road, not stopping until I hit the highway. I kept checking my rearview mirror the whole way, half expecting something to come out of the woods behind me, but nothing did. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time, just said the trip was peaceful and quiet. A month later, I finally looked up the area online. Not a lot of info, but I did find a small blog run by a guy who explored abandoned cabins in the Pacific Northwest. He'd been to the same area. One of his posts showed the same cabin years ago. In the comments, someone mentioned strange sounds, missing items, and seeing odd symbols made from sticks outside their door. I still don't know who or what was out there, but I know I wasn't alone, and I'll never go back to a cabin that deep in the woods again. I needed a break from people. That's what it all came down to. Work, family, friends, they were all just noise. I was tired of messages, meetings, updates, and opinions. I was tired of the crowded city, the honking, the concrete. I needed real quiet. No music, no traffic, no news, just silence and trees. So I booked a remote cabin deep in the northern part of Minnesota. It was supposed to be an off-grid retreat. No cell service, no internet, propane lights, a wood stove, and a small stream nearby for water. The listing said it was a mile off a dirt road, surrounded by forest, and didn't get much foot traffic. That sounded perfect. I packed light, just clothes, some dried food, matches, water filter, a good axe, and my hiking boots. I didn't bring a gun because I didn't plan to hunt or do anything stupid. I wasn't worried about animals either. The most dangerous thing out there would be a bear, and they usually stay away. Besides, it was early October, cold enough to keep the bugs down, but not so cold that I'd freeze at night. I drove most of the day. As I turned off the last paved road, I lost cell signal. The gravel road narrowed as I went deeper into the trees. The GPS gave up halfway down a barely visible track. I found a small, hand-painted sign that just said cabin, with an arrow pointing down a narrower trail. I parked my truck in a small clearing, grabbed my backpack, and walked the rest of the way in. It was about a mile, like the listing said. The trail wasn't much of a trail, just a depression in the ground that looked like it had been driven on a few times a year. The cabin was there, just like the pictures. Small, made of old logs, a metal roof, a fire ring out front, a single outhouse off to the side. It smelled like pine and earth, and the air was colder than I expected. I could hear nothing. No wind, no birds, no cars, just trees standing still. I stepped inside. It was dark but dry. One window, a table, a small cot with a thin mattress, a wood stove in the corner and a stack of split logs next to it. A couple shelves with some dusty pans and mismatched utensils. One oil lamp. I unpacked, set up my sleeping bag, and got the fire going. The warmth filled the space quickly. I boiled some water from the stream, made tea, and sat outside by the fire ring until the sun went down. That first night, I slept like a rock. The kind of sleep you don't get in the city. Deep and still. I woke once to use the outhouse and looked up at the sky. The stars were so many and so bright that it almost didn't feel real. I stood out there in the cold longer than I should have, just looking up. The next morning, I made oatmeal and went for a walk. There were no trails, just forest in every direction. I kept track of my path by turning back every few steps to memorize the landscape. Fallen logs, strange trees, mossy rocks. I wasn't planning to go far, just enough to stretch my legs and get familiar with the surroundings. It all looked the same after a while. That day was quiet, peaceful. I chopped more wood, wrote in my journal, read an old paperback I'd brought. Around sunset, I was making soup over the stove when I noticed something strange. A footprint outside the window, just one, in the soft dirt near the fire ring. It wasn't mine. It was bigger than my boot and pointed in the wrong direction. At first, I thought maybe it was from whoever had cleaned the cabin last. But the dirt was too fresh. I checked around and saw no other prints. I stood there for a while just looking at it. One print, not going anywhere, just pointing toward the cabin. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept hearing things, small snaps and rustles. Maybe animals, maybe the trees settling. I tried to ignore it. At one point, I got up and opened the door with my flashlight. I shined it around the trees, but there was nothing. Just darkness. Still, I kept the axe next to my cot, just in case. The next day, I went farther into the woods. I followed a ridge that overlooked a low area full of thick brush. I climbed down and poked around the undergrowth. That's when I found it. Tarp. Old, sun-bleached, and half-covered in leaves. I thought maybe it was trash, but as I pulled it back, I saw something under it. A small metal pot, a pair of jeans, a boot, and a plastic bag with some food wrappers inside. Someone had camped there. It wasn't recent, but it wasn't ancient either. A few months old, maybe. The pot still had some soot on the bottom, and the bag hadn't been chewed through by animals. I looked around but didn't see anything else. No tent, no sleeping bag, no fire ring. Just that pile under the tarp. I didn't touch anything else. I walked back to the cabin feeling uneasy. My mind kept going back to the footprint. Then the tarp. Was someone else out here? That evening, I put a few logs on the fire early and closed the shutters. I didn't want to look outside. I ate quickly and got into my sleeping bag with the axe right next to me. I stayed awake listening, and I heard something. Footsteps. Slow. In the leaves. Outside. I held my breath and stayed still. The steps stopped just outside the wall, maybe 5 feet away. I couldn't see anything through the shutters, but I could hear. Breathing. Stayed there for a while. Then it moved away. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I looked outside and found new prints. Two this time. One near the window again. One by the door. Same kind of print as before, bigger than mine, heavy, deep. They didn't come from anywhere. No trail in, no trail out. I had 2 full days left of my stay, but I was thinking about cutting it short. Still, part of me didn't want to seem like I was being paranoid. Maybe someone had passed through. A hunter? A ranger? But then again, why would they just stand by the cabin in the dark? I decided to hike out to the clearing where I'd left my truck, just to make sure everything was still okay. It was about a mile through thick woods, but I took my time. When I got there, the truck was still there. No broken windows, nothing stolen. But then I noticed something that made my blood go cold. There were scratch marks on the rear driver's side door. Thin lines, shallow but clear. 4 of them spaced out like fingers. Not from a branch or animal. They looked deliberate, like someone had dragged their hand along the paint. That was it for me. I decided I'd leave the next morning. It was already late in the afternoon, and I didn't want to hike out and drive in the dark. I went back to the cabin, packed everything but my sleeping bag, and made one last fire. I stayed inside. I didn't eat much. That night, the sounds came back, but this time they were louder. I heard movement all around the cabin. More than one set of footsteps. A shuffle here, crack there. I sat on the cot, clutching the axe, listening. I didn't dare look out. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl. A dragging sound on the wall, long and slow, like a stick or a hand going across the logs. Then silence. Then a knock, not loud, just one tap, right on the window. I didn't move. Then another knock. On the door this time. I stayed frozen for hours. I didn't sleep. I just waited for the light. As soon as I could see the gray light of morning through the shutters, I got up, grabbed my pack, and left. I didn't even bother cleaning up. I just hiked straight out to the truck with the axe still in my hand. The forest felt heavy, like the trees were watching. When I got to the clearing, the truck was untouched. I threw my gear in the back, started it, and drove away as fast as the trail would let me. I didn't stop until I was miles away and had full bars on my phone. I reported what happened to the county sheriff once I got back to the nearest town. They took a statement, asked if anything was stolen or damaged. I told them about the prints, the knocking, the scratch marks. They wrote it all down but didn't seem too alarmed. Just said it was probably a drifter or squatter and thanked me for letting them know. I never heard back. That was 8 months ago. I still think about it sometimes. I'll be walking down the street or laying in bed at night, and I'll remember the sound of that knock, that slow, dragging noise on the wall, the feeling of being watched from the trees. I don't go out into the woods alone anymore, not because I'm afraid of animals or getting lost. I'm afraid of people, because whatever was out there wasn't lost. It wasn't confused. It knew exactly where I was, and it wanted me to know it. It was the second week of October when I decided to take a break from the city and head out to the mountains. I'd been working nonstop for months, and I felt drained. My plan was simple. Rent a cabin deep in the woods, leave my phone off, and just spend a few days in silence, hiking during the day and reading or writing in the evenings. I didn't want anything fancy, just something isolated where no one would bother me. I found a listing for a cabin about 6 miles off the main road near a place called Pine Ridge, up in the hills of northern Montana. The listing showed an old wooden structure, no Wi-Fi, no cell service, and running water only if I pumped it myself. Perfect. I packed clothes, a few books, a hatchet, a large flashlight, extra batteries, some canned food, dry goods, and a few gallons of water just in case. I brought my journal too. I liked to write when I was away. The road to the cabin was a narrow dirt path, the kind where tree branches scrape the sides of your car as you go. The deeper I got, the rougher the road became. At times I had to slow to a crawl to avoid hitting deep ruts or rocks. I drove a small SUV so I could handle it, but it wasn't exactly smooth. It took almost 45 minutes of slow driving to get from the main road to where I finally saw the clearing. The cabin sat in a small open area surrounded by tall pines. There was a fire pit made of stones out front, a small porch with a sagging wooden chair, and a rickety shed-out back. There was no one around for miles. It was completely quiet. I parked the SUV next to the cabin and got out. The air smelled clean and sharp, like pine needles and earth. I could hear a few birds, some wind in the trees. That was it. No cars, no voices, nothing. Inside the cabin, everything was old but sturdy. The floorboards creaked, the windows were small, and the furniture was basic. Just a table, 2 chairs, a cot with a mattress that looked like it had been there for decades, and a wood stove in the corner. A pile of chopped firewood was stacked neatly next to it. There were a few shelves with pots, pans, a hand crank lantern, and some old utensils. I unpacked slowly, putting my canned food on the shelf, laying my sleeping bag on the cot, setting my flashlight and lantern where I could reach them. Then I walked the property. Behind the cabin was the shed, padlocked, weathered, and leaning to one side. Beyond that, the forest thickened. A narrow trail cut through the trees, heading downhill. I figured I'd explore that the next day. That first night, I made a small fire in the fire pit outside and warmed a can of chili on a small grate. I sat on a log by the fire and ate slowly. The stars were coming out, sharp and clear in the sky. No light pollution at all. I went inside when it got too cold and lit the stove. It took a bit to get the fire going, but once it did, it warmed the cabin well. I wrote in my journal, read for a bit, and went to bed early. Around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to use the bathroom. There was no toilet inside, just an outhouse about 20 yards behind the cabin. I bundled up and stepped outside. The fire in the stove had gone out. I carried my flashlight and kept it low, sweeping the beam side to side. The night was quiet, so quiet it was almost loud. The kind of silence that makes your ears feel full. I did my business quickly and was about to head back inside when I heard something. A crunch, like a footstep, came from the trees to my left. I froze. The beam of my flashlight shook a little in my hand. I waited. Nothing else. No more sounds. Probably an animal. I turned back toward the cabin and walked quickly. Inside, I shut the door and locked it. I put another log in the stove and lit it again. The warmth felt good, but I couldn't shake that feeling. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe a raccoon, but I kept the flashlight next to my sleeping bag and didn't fall asleep right away. The next morning, I hiked the narrow trail behind the cabin. It went downhill for a while, winding through thick pines. I found a small creek at the bottom, shallow but fast-moving. I followed it for a while and saw some old animal tracks in the mud, possibly deer or elk. I spent most of the day hiking and collecting firewood. That night, I cooked again outside, but this time I kept glancing toward the trees. I didn't see anything, but I couldn't relax. I went in before dark, locked the door, and kept the fire going strong. I wrote for a while, mostly about the silence and how different it felt being completely cut off. I woke again around 2 a.m. I didn't need to use the bathroom this time. I just woke up suddenly, heart beating fast. Something felt off. I reached for my flashlight and listened. The fire in the stove was low but still glowing. The wind had picked up outside. I heard branches creaking and rubbing together. But then I heard something else. A metallic clang, like metal hitting wood, came again. A slow clunk, then silence. Then again. My mind immediately thought of the shed, the padlocked one out back. I sat up and strained to hear. Another clunk, then silence. It stopped completely after a few minutes. I didn't go back to sleep for hours. In the morning, I walked behind the cabin to the shed. The padlock was still there, but the door looked slightly ajar, like it had been tugged. I pulled on it. The lock held, but the door moved slightly before stopping. I checked the trees nearby. Nothing. No tracks that I could see. The ground was hard with fallen needles. That afternoon, I drove my SUV down the trail a bit to see if I had any cell service closer to the main road. A few miles out, I picked up one bar. I sent a message to a friend just letting them know where I was and that everything was fine. I didn't mention the sounds. The third night, things got worse. I went to bed early, feeling worn down. Around 1 a.m., I woke to a loud noise with splintering. I jumped up, grabbed the flashlight, and pointed it at the door. It was still locked. The noise had come from outside, maybe near the porch. I killed the fire in the stove and stood in the dark, listening. I didn't move for maybe 15 minutes. Then I heard soft footsteps, like someone walking slowly around the cabin. Not animal-like, heavy, deliberate. I crouched near the cot, holding the flashlight but not turning it on. The footsteps stopped. Then something scratched the wall, slow and long, like nails on wood. My chest was tight. I didn't move. The scratching stopped. After a long time, I heard nothing more. At sunrise, I checked outside. Near the porch, several of the wooden boards were cracked, like someone had stepped hard in one place repeatedly. There were no tracks. Nothing else looked disturbed. I walked 100 yards in each direction. Still nothing. I didn't understand it. I didn't know if someone was messing with me or if I was imagining things. I stayed inside most of that day. I kept the fire low and wrote in my journal to calm myself. I debated leaving early, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. Maybe the boards had just rotted and broken from my own steps. Maybe I hadn't noticed before. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair with the lantern lit, listening. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. A thud against the wall. Then nothing. Then a sound near the back window, like breathing. Slow and deep. I turned off the lantern. I sat frozen. The breathing lasted maybe 20 seconds. Then it stopped. I didn't sleep at all. In the morning, I packed up. I didn't care how it looked. Something was wrong. I loaded everything in the SUV, locked the cabin, and drove out fast. I made it to the main road in record time, dust flying behind me. When I got back home, I looked up the cabin listing again. It had been taken down. I searched the address, nothing. No phone number, no reviews. It was like it had been pulled completely. I even tried asking in a few forums if anyone knew about Pine Ridge or that specific spot. No one responded. A week later, I saw a small story buried on a local Montana news site. A hunter had gone missing in that same area. His truck was found parked near a narrow trail. No sign of him. The article said there had been signs of a struggle near a small clearing. They posted a photo of the area. I recognized the trees. It was the trail behind the cabin. I don't go into the woods anymore. I don't rent cabins. I don't even camp. Whatever was out there wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster, but it was real. And I think it watched me every night I was there. I was lucky. That's all it was. Just plain luck. I wasn't planning on staying in that cabin for more than a couple nights. My idea was simple. Escape the stress of my job, get off the grid for a weekend, maybe do some fishing or read something that wasn't on a glowing screen. The place I picked was a small log cabin I found through an old listing on a forum for remote rentals. No fancy booking sites, no reviews, just a phone number and a couple of grainy photos showing a wooden cabin surrounded by trees. The man who owned it didn't ask many questions when I called. Just told me to leave cash in a lockbox outside the door and said the keys would be under a rock by the front steps. It all felt strange, but something about the simplicity of it made me go through with it. I packed a duffel bag with essentials: clothes, dry food, a flashlight, my hunting knife, and a couple books, and drove 6 hours out of the city. The road turned from pavement to gravel, then narrowed until it felt more like a walking trail than a driveway. Trees pressed in on either side, and the sky, already starting to darken, grew even dimmer under the canopy. Finally, I reached the clearing. The cabin was even smaller than it looked in the photos, but solid. No lights, no signs of modern life, just wood, stone, and shadows. I parked off to the side and stepped out. The air smelled sharp, like pine needles and damp earth. There was a silence you only get way out in the woods. No cars, no people, just wind in the trees. I found the key, let myself in, and looked around. The inside was bare bones. One room with a stone fireplace, a small cot pushed against the wall, a rough wooden table, and a few chairs. There was no electricity. A few oil lamps hung on the walls, and there was a pile of dry wood beside the fireplace. I set my things down and started settling in. Built a small fire, unpacked, and stepped outside to get a feel for the area. There was an old path leading off behind the cabin, almost hidden by overgrowth. I followed it for about 10 minutes before turning back. Something about the forest felt watchful. I know that sounds vague, but that's the only way I can describe it. The trees seemed too still, the underbrush too quiet. Back in the cabin, I heated a can of chili over the fire and ate while watching the flames. I turned in early, the silence outside making every creak in the woods seem louder. The first night passed quietly, though I woke up a few times thinking I'd heard something outside. Just animals, I told myself. Maybe a raccoon. The next morning, I stepped out early with a thermos of coffee and looked around. The woods were foggy. I walked the same trail again, this time going farther. I passed a dry creek bed and a cluster of broken branches that looked like they'd been stepped on recently. No shoe prints, though, just snapped wood and disturbed leaves. Again, I shook it off. Probably deer or a bear. I kept hiking and found a small hill that gave a decent view of the forest around me. As I looked out over the trees, I thought I saw movement, far off, maybe 100 yards away. A figure? Hard to tell. I froze, watched, but nothing moved again. I stood there for a long time before heading back. I hadn't seen another person since I got here, and something about seeing someone now felt wrong. Back at the cabin, I tried to distract myself. I chopped some wood. I read. I fixed one of the window shutters that was barely hanging on. But I kept thinking about what I'd seen, or thought I saw. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept the fire going and one of the oil lamps lit. I kept the knife near me, just in case. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound. Not an animal, not wind. A thud, solid, like someone stepping hard on the porch. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, breathing shallow. Then another sound, something brushing against the door. I got up slowly, grabbed the knife, and crept to the window. I couldn't see anything. I stayed awake the rest of the night, firelight flickering against the log walls, my ears straining for more sounds. But nothing else happened. Morning came, and I stepped out, tired and tense. I checked around the cabin. No footprints. The ground was too hard, the dirt packed down, but the doormat had been shifted. I hadn't touched it. It was one of those little things you notice that doesn't mean much on its own, but it adds up. I walked the trail again that day, but this time I brought my knife and a walking stick. I didn't go as far. I didn't feel comfortable out there anymore. When I got back, I noticed something else. The door wasn't fully closed. I was sure I'd latched it. I always double-check things like that, especially out here. I went inside and looked around. Nothing missing. Nothing moved. But the air felt different, like someone else had breathed it. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat by the fire, both oil lamps lit, knife in hand. Around midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps, this time on the side of the cabin. Slow, deliberate. A pause, then more. I stood up and pressed my back to the wall, listening. Then came the scraping sound, like something hard dragged across wood. I waited. Then silence. I stepped to the window and looked out. I saw movement, something ducking out of view. I couldn't make out details, but it was human-sized, maybe taller. I didn't open the door. I waited. It didn't come back. I made it until morning, then packed my things. I didn't care that I had another night paid for. I was done. I loaded the bag into the car, checked the back seat, then got in. The gravel road felt longer on the way out. When I finally hit pavement, I didn't stop driving until I reached a town 2 hours away. I didn't report anything. What would I even say? There was no proof, no crime, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched out there. Not by something supernatural, but by someone who didn't want me there. A week after I got back, I saw a news article linked in a forum thread. A hiker had gone missing in that area. Same forest. He was last seen about 10 miles from where I stayed. No foul play confirmed, but his car was found abandoned. Reading that made my skin crawl. I remembered the figure I saw in the woods, the footsteps at night, the door being open. I never went back. I never contacted the man who owned the place. I still think about it sometimes. How close I came to something I couldn't see. How lucky I was to leave when I did. Because I'm sure now someone was out there, and they weren't just passing by. I had no real reason to pick that cabin. I just wanted to get away from everyone for a while. Work had been nonstop for months, and I felt like I hadn't had a quiet moment to myself in years. I didn't want beaches or hotels or any place with a front desk. I wanted to disappear into the woods, live simple for a while, and be completely alone with my thoughts. I found the place online, buried inside a forum thread about off-grid rentals. It wasn't on any official site, just a guy posting pictures of this old wooden cabin in northern Montana. Said it was used by trappers long ago. No electricity, no plumbing, but it had a working wood stove, a cot, and a spring nearby for water. The guy even warned that it was boring and isolated, and I remember smiling at that. It sounded perfect. It took a day and a half of driving just to get up there. I passed smaller and smaller towns until I was driving along nothing but dirt roads, surrounded by pine and snow. The last 30 miles took me over an hour. I had to go slow. The forest was thick, and the road wasn't plowed. Eventually, I had to stop at a clearing and hike the last mile to the cabin with all my gear. The guy who posted the listing emailed me a hand-drawn map. I kept checking it like it was a treasure map. The cabin was small and buried in snow, but it was exactly what I wanted. Wooden logs darkened by time, a heavy door that creaked when I opened it, and a small cast iron stove in the corner. There were wooden shelves with some old, empty jars and a few rusted tools. Nothing modern except a metal lantern someone left hanging by the window. I brought my own stuff anyway. A sleeping bag, fire-starting supplies, canned food, and a hunting knife. I even brought a portable solar charger for my phone, though there was no signal out there. The first few days were peaceful. I spent time gathering wood, reading, and just sitting in the cold silence of the forest. It was deep winter, so I didn't go far from the cabin. The snow was knee-deep in places, and it was easy to get lost. But that was the point. I wanted silence. I wanted to hear nothing but the wind through the trees and the crack of the fire at night. And I got it. But something started to feel off around the 5th day. It began small. I remember going out in the morning to pee, and I saw boot prints in the snow behind the cabin. They weren't mine. I checked just to be sure. My own were around the front and side of the cabin, but these were coming from the woods behind and leading right up to the back wall. They didn't go anywhere else. They just stopped at the back wall and turned around, heading back into the trees. No other prints. I walked around the cabin twice, thinking maybe I forgot walking there earlier, but I hadn't. The prints were different, bigger than mine and spaced farther apart. I told myself maybe it was a hunter or someone else using the land, but there weren't any houses nearby, not even a shack for miles. Still, I let it go. The prints were probably old, I told myself. Maybe I didn't notice them until now. But after that day, I started checking more often. Every morning, I walked around the cabin. I didn't find anything strange until 2 days later. It had snowed lightly during the night, not enough to hide everything. I saw new tracks again. Same boots. They came from the woods again and circled the cabin this time. A full circle, like someone was walking around, looking in the windows. Then they went back into the trees, following the same direction as before. I felt something tighten in my chest when I saw that. I stared at the trees for a long time, trying to see movement between them. There was nothing, but the feeling stayed with me. A slow itch between my shoulder blades, a sense of being watched. I stood outside for maybe 10 minutes, just staring at the line where the trees got dense. But there was no sound, no motion, just snow and pine. Inside the cabin, I kept checking the windows. I barely read that day. I just sat near the stove, watching the light shift on the floor. I started to notice how quiet it really was out there. No planes, no birds, no animals, just wind and trees. You don't think about silence until you're deep in it. And out there, you start hearing things that might not be real. A creak that could be the cabin settling. A thump that might be snow sliding off the roof. But your brain still makes you pause. It makes you stare at the door. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept the fire going longer than I needed to. Every little pop made me flinch. I even blocked the bottom of the door with my boots and used my sleeping bag on the floor instead of the cot, just to stay out of view from the windows. When I woke up the next morning, I checked again. More prints. This time, they came much closer to the front, right up to the door. Then they circled back. I followed them, moving slow, breathing hard. They went back to the woods. Same way as always. I stood there for a long time, just listening. Then I went inside and locked the door. Even though the lock was just a wooden bar you slide into a notch, I kept the fire small. I didn't want the light to spill too much, and I started keeping the lantern off at night. I didn't want someone looking in and seeing exactly where I was. I spent that whole day jumping at every sound. I even kept the hunting knife close. I wasn't used to that feeling. Not just fear, but the deep kind, the kind that makes your stomach tense all the time. I started thinking about how far I really was. No one knew exactly where I was. No one would hear me scream even if I tried. And there were no neighbors, just snow and forest. That evening, I heard something outside. It was around dusk. I was sitting against the far wall, near the stove, trying not to make noise. The fire was low. The lantern was off. And through the wall, I heard something. Not loud, just a crunch, like a boot pressing into snow. Then another. Slow steps, close, right outside. I held my breath. I sat completely still. The footsteps moved along the wall, scraping near the edge. Then they stopped. I didn't move for almost 10 minutes after that. The cabin was completely silent. My hands were numb from how tight I was gripping the knife. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to peek through the small space between the logs. Just a crack in the wood. I saw nothing but trees and snow. No movement. No prints from that angle. Just cold. That night was the longest of my life. I barely slept. I kept the knife in my hand and the fire dead. I was afraid even the smallest glow would give me away. The next morning, the prints were there again. Right up to the cabin. Right to the front. Right to the side window. They were fresh, clear, and they led straight back to the trees. Always the same direction. Like someone came from the woods every night to check on me, then left before dawn. That was the day I decided to leave. I packed up before the sun even cleared the trees. I kept looking over my shoulder. My hands shook as I threw everything into my backpack. I didn't even clean up. I just stuffed food, tools, clothes, everything into one bundle and left. I didn't care about leaving things behind. I just wanted to move. The snow made it hard. I kept tripping. My legs were heavy. I walked fast, then slow, then fast again, always turning to check behind me. I kept thinking I heard something, a step, a branch breaking, but every time I stopped, it was just silence. When I got to where I'd parked the car, I saw more tracks. Not mine. These ones were faint but there, leading up to the edge of the clearing, just before where I parked. Like someone had stood there watching, just watching. I started the car and drove. I didn't stop, not until I reached the edge of the nearest town. I never went back. I never contacted the guy who posted the cabin, and I never left a review. I didn't want anything to do with it. I don't even know if that guy really owned it. I don't know if someone else had been using it too. Maybe someone lived out there watching for strangers. But I still think about those prints, the pattern of them, the way they always circled, always came close, always left the same way. It didn't feel like some random hiker. It felt like a routine, like something that person had done before, and I just happened to be there this time. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed one more night. What if I'd opened the door? What if they knocked? I never go off-grid anymore. I never stay alone in the woods. That trip changed something in me. It taught me that the silence I wanted so badly, the quiet, peaceful escape, can hide things, can cover sounds, can make you think you're alone when you're not. And I don't think I was alone in that cabin. Not for a single night. It started on a Wednesday morning in early November, right after I decided to take a short break from work. I had been working from home for months, barely stepping out except for groceries. Everything started to feel too quiet, like the walls were closing in. I needed a change of scenery, even if just for a few days. I looked online and found a small cabin in the woods about 4 hours north of where I lived. The listing said it was isolated, peaceful, surrounded by trees, no Wi-Fi, no cell service. That sounded perfect to me. I packed up that same night. I didn't bring much, just the basics: some canned food, bottled water, dry snacks, a flashlight, a small hatchet, some books, a folding knife, a heavy jacket, and 2 changes of clothes. I also brought my laptop, mostly for writing, not for internet use. The plan was simple: drive there, spend 4 nights alone, hike a little during the day, write in the evenings, and come back feeling refreshed. The drive was peaceful. Trees on both sides of the road were mostly bare, with leaves scattered all over the gravel. By the time I reached the private dirt road that led to the cabin, I had already passed the last town about 40 minutes back. My car rattled a bit as it moved slowly over the uneven road. There were no signs, just a set of GPS coordinates that the owner had emailed me. Eventually, the trees opened up and I saw it. A small wooden cabin with a metal roof, a porch with 2 chairs, and a narrow chimney. It looked exactly like the pictures. I parked the car off to the side, turned off the engine, and stepped out into complete silence. The only sound was the wind moving through the branches above. No cars, no people, no animals, just silence and cold air. Inside, the cabin was simple. 1 large room with a bed in the corner, a table near a window, a small wood stove, and a tiny kitchenette with a sink and 2 cabinets. There was no bathroom, just an outhouse behind the cabin about 20 feet into the trees. I unloaded my stuff, lit a fire in the stove using the wood the owner had stacked beside it, and settled in. The first night was uneventful. I made some tea, read a few chapters from a book, and listened to the wind as I lay under the heavy blanket on the bed. The next morning, I woke up early. The fire had gone out during the night, so the cabin was freezing. I threw on my jacket and boots, stepped outside, and split some more firewood using the hatchet. After that, I ate a cold granola bar and decided to go for a short hike. I followed a trail behind the cabin that led deeper into the woods. It wasn't an official trail, just a narrow path that looked like animals or hunters might have used it at some point. I walked for about 45 minutes, moving slowly and stopping often to listen. Everything out there felt thick and still. It was beautiful in a dead kind of way. The trees were tall and gray, the sky overcast. I didn't see a single bird, not even a squirrel. Eventually, I turned back and made my way to the cabin, noticing my own tracks in the patchy mud as I walked. That evening, something strange happened. While I was chopping more firewood near the side of the cabin, I noticed something in the dirt. Another footprint. It wasn't one of mine. I could tell by the shape and direction. It was bigger, wider, and pointed toward the trees, away from the trail I had used. I looked around carefully, trying to see if there were more. I found 2 more prints, heading in the same direction. They looked fresh, probably no more than a few hours old. I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was a hunter, or maybe someone who used the trail before me. I hadn't seen anyone, but that didn't mean much out here. Still, something about the prints bothered me. They weren't on a clear trail, just off to the side, near the outhouse. That night, I kept the fire going longer. I locked the door from the inside and sat at the table for hours, just staring out the window at the woods. Every time the wind rustled the trees, I felt my chest tighten. The second full day started cloudy. I didn't feel like hiking. I stayed close to the cabin, collecting kindling, boiling water on the stove, and trying to write in my journal. But I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about the footprints. Around noon, I walked around the cabin to look again. The prints were still there, clear as ever. I followed them a bit further this time. They led into the trees, curved around the back of the cabin, then disappeared into thicker brush. I didn't go any further. I just stood there listening. There was nothing, no movement, no sound. But I had that feeling in my chest again, like I was being watched. I turned around and walked back quickly, trying not to look over my shoulder. Later that evening, just before sunset, I decided to use the outhouse. It was cold and already dim outside. As I stepped out of the cabin, I noticed something new. Another footprint. This time it was even closer, maybe 5 or 6 feet from the back wall. My stomach dropped. Whoever it was, they had come closer. Way closer. I looked around in every direction, but the woods were still. My ears were ringing. I tried to listen past the wind, but there was nothing. Just trees. I didn't use the outhouse. I went back inside, bolted the door, pulled the curtains shut, and sat with my back to the wall, holding the folding knife in my hand. I felt ridiculous, like I was overreacting, but something was wrong. I could feel it. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, fully dressed, the knife beside me, and the fire burning low. Every small sound outside made my heart race. A few times I thought I heard soft crunching footsteps, but I couldn't be sure. I kept telling myself it was just wind or animals. When the sun came up, I didn't waste any time. I stepped outside and looked around the cabin. There were more footprints, at least 4 different spots. Whoever it was had walked right up to the windows. One print was directly in front of the door. Another was beside the stack of firewood. Another near the outhouse. It was like they had circled the cabin, getting closer and closer. I stood there, holding the hatchet, breathing heavily. I wanted to believe it was a hunter or someone lost. But why would they come back? Why would they keep circling? And why hadn't they knocked or said anything? I made a decision right then. I was leaving. I packed everything in a rush, throwing it all into my bag, barely folding anything. I put the fire out, zipped up my jacket, and locked the cabin behind me out of habit, even though I knew it didn't matter. I walked to the car, looking behind me every few steps. The trees looked different that morning, darker somehow, like they were holding something. I got in the car and turned the key. Nothing happened. The engine didn't even turn over, just a soft clicking sound. I tried again and again. Nothing. My heart started pounding. I popped the hood, got out, and looked inside. I didn't know much about engines, but something caught my eye right away. The battery cable had been cut. Clean. A straight slice through the thick wire. That's when the real fear hit me. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this. Someone had been watching the cabin, waiting for the right time. I backed away from the car and looked toward the woods, spinning in place, scanning the trees. I didn't see anything. No movement, no sound. I had 2 choices: stay and hope someone found me or try to hike out. I looked at my phone. No signal, like always. I didn't have a radio, no flare, nothing. I stuffed some food and water into my backpack, grabbed the knife and hatchet, and took off down the trail I had used on the first day. I knew it would eventually take me back to the dirt road, and from there I could follow it to the highway. The hike was brutal. I kept turning around, expecting someone to be behind me. Every time I stopped to catch my breath, I heard nothing but wind and leaves. But the feeling was there, stronger than ever. I knew I was being followed. I didn't see them, but I knew. About an hour into the hike, I found more footprints. Not mine. New ones. Heavy, deep, fresh. I sped up, nearly running, breathing hard, pushing through branches and brush. My legs burned. I stumbled a few times but didn't stop. I just kept going. By the time I reached the dirt road, it was almost dark. I was exhausted, freezing, my throat dry, hands numb. I turned left and started walking, hoping to hit the highway before nightfall. I didn't make it. Night came fast. The road was long and curved, and I didn't have a flashlight anymore. I had left it in the cabin. I kept walking anyway, holding the hatchet in one hand, the knife in the other. Every sound in the woods felt like a person. Every shadow looked like movement. Then I saw lights, faint but they're far ahead on the road, headlights. Car was coming. I waved my arms and ran toward it, yelling even though I didn't know if they could hear me. The car slowed down, then stopped. It was a pickup truck. The driver rolled down the window. I didn't say anything. I just climbed into the bed of the truck, and the driver didn't ask questions. He looked back once, saw the fear on my face, and just drove. We didn't talk until we reached town. I explained what happened. It was supposed to be a quiet week away. That was all I wanted. No phones, no emails, no traffic, no noise. Just time to myself. I had rented this old cabin deep in the northern woods, about 3 hours from the closest town. It was off a dirt road, barely even visible on the map. No one lived nearby. That was the point. The cabin was simple, wooden, and clearly aged. The porch creaked when I stepped onto it, and the windows were dusty and streaked from years of rain. Inside, the furniture was basic. A small couch, a fireplace, a kitchen with old metal cabinets, a wooden dining table, and one bedroom with a twin bed that sagged in the middle. There was a bathroom, but it only had cold water and the toilet flushed with a loud gurgle that echoed through the pipes. Still, it was exactly what I wanted. Solitude. The first couple of days were calm. I went for hikes along old logging trails, cooked simple meals, read books, and fell asleep early. The silence at night was heavy. Not a car, not a plane, not even distant voices. Just the sound of wind through trees and the occasional crack of branches. On the third night, I woke up around 2 a.m. No reason, just wide awake. I lay there listening. I could hear the trees shifting slightly in the breeze. Then I heard something else. Faint, quick steps across the ground outside. I froze. It wasn't an animal. Too deliberate. Just a few steps and then nothing. I stayed still in bed, my eyes open wide in the darkness, waiting to hear it again. But nothing else came. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I walked around the cabin to see if anything looked off. Nothing did. No footprints in the dirt, no signs of movement. Still, it had unsettled me. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe a raccoon, but I couldn't shake the sound. That night, I made sure all the windows were locked. I jammed a chair under the doorknob even though the deadbolt was sturdy. It took me a long time to fall asleep. Sometime during the night, I heard the footsteps again, this time slower, like someone walking along the edge of the porch. I held my breath. They were right outside the bedroom window. I didn't move. The steps stopped. Then I heard the porch floorboards creak. I gripped the blanket so tightly it hurt my hands. My ears strained. It sounded like someone was standing just outside the front door. Then a long pause. The sound of footsteps again, fading slowly. I stayed awake the rest of the night. In the morning, I checked again. This time, I found something. A single shoe print near the porch. Not deep, just one. It was too large to be mine. It wasn't a boot print like mine either. It was smooth-soled, like a sneaker. I didn't know what to think. I hadn't seen another person since I'd arrived. Not a hiker, not a car. Nothing. It was remote. It would have taken effort to even find this place. I told myself it had to be a leftover from a previous guest. Maybe someone had stayed here recently. I tried to believe it. That afternoon, I decided to go for a longer hike to clear my head. I followed a narrow trail that wound downhill to a small stream. I walked maybe an hour before I turned around. On the way back, I spotted something on the trail, a small scrap of paper tucked under a stone. I picked it up. It was blank, except for 3 words scribbled in shaky handwriting. "Why are you here?" My stomach dropped. I looked around. The woods were silent. I stuffed the note in my pocket and kept walking, faster than before. I didn't stop until I reached the cabin. That night, I didn't sleep. The next day, I made up my mind to leave early. I packed my bag and loaded the car. I wasn't going to stay another night. As I stepped outside with the last of my things, I noticed something on the cabin door. Scratched into the wood, deep and rough, were the same words from the note. "Why are you here?" That was it. I jumped in the car and drove. Fast. The dirt road kicked up clouds behind me. I didn't slow down until I hit the highway. I checked into a motel that night, about 2 hours from the cabin. It was run down, but it felt like heaven. I slept with the lights on. The next morning, I drove home. The whole drive, I kept checking my mirrors. Nothing. Just empty road. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. What would I say? There was no proof. Just sounds in the dark and a few creepy words. But 2 days after I got back, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. No stamp. Just placed in my mailbox. Inside was another note, same handwriting. You weren't supposed to leave. I moved 2 weeks later. It's been months now. I live in a different city. Bigger, louder, people everywhere. I keep my windows locked and I don't go anywhere without telling someone. I still don't know who was out there, or how they found me, or what they wanted. But I haven't gone back to the woods since, and I never will.